that hurts businesses, and it hurts our entire economy. And since the stabilization funds have run dry, this problem will only continue getting worse unless we take action. We're talking about even greater damage to our economy, billions in lost wages, revenue, and growth, and we can't let that happen. We have made important bipartisan progress in strengthening annual child care funding, including in our Senate Labor HHS bill this summer, but we've got to do more to meet this crisis and act on the President's request. So to my Republican colleagues, let's work together to address this growing economic problem in all of our states. And of course, there are the other issues that Congress needs to act on as well. The President has requested additional funding to address the fentanyl crisis head-on, to meet operational requirements and needs at our southern border, and improve the USCIS processing capacity. It's important that we work together in a serious, bipartisan fashion to address those challenges. We are facing significant numbers of encounters at the border each day and seizing record amounts of fentanyl. Just as we did with the fiscal year 2024 Homeland Security bill, this committee needs to work in a bipartisan way to address the reality that our federal agencies are dealing with on the ground. When it comes to the opioid crisis, I've sat down with so many people on the front lines all across my state, first responders, healthcare workers, patients who are in recovery, parents who do not know what to do when their child is suffering from an addiction. I have heard so many heavy stories that I bring with me to work every day, stories that demand action from this Congress. And I know every member on this dais has heard similar heartbreaking stories about the devastation of the opioid crisis. None of the people we represent who are on the front lines of this crisis want us to play politics with their lives. So I hope we are all able to have a very serious, respectful conversation about real solutions to this crisis. Let's talk about funding for mental health and substance use disorder treatments, and let's talk about health and public safety. And let's absolutely talk about stopping fentanyl from entering our country and our communities and disrupting and dismantling the transnational criminal organizations that are producing and trafficking it. But we cannot grandstand for political points. The President has requested critical funding to modernize our illicit drug detection systems and technology, to stop fentanyl from coming into our country, to break up the supply chains that are used to produce it in the first place, and support those fighting the opioid crisis in their communities. We've got to act on those requests, as well as the President's funding request to meet operational requirements and needs at the southern border. And I hope that instead of wasting time on partisan non-starters, we actually can work together, all of us, on common sense, bipartisan solutions to help us humanely manage encounters at the border, process claims of non-citizens seeking protection under our nation's asylum laws, while continuing our country's long tradition of welcoming people who flee violence and persecution. We need to fund basic DHS needs like short-term facilities, transportation, medical care, and other related activities that provide a humane environment for asylum seekers while in DHS custody, and support the critical work of border communities, NGOs, and our frontline staff. We should all be able to agree that we need to make sure that the folks who safeguard our borders have the resources they need to do their jobs safely, humanely, and effectively, and that reducing the USCIS backlog is a good thing as is in continuing our work to welcome refugees from across the world at a time when so many people are suffering, which is why we also need to fund HHS programs to prevent drastic cuts for states and organizations around the country who are helping refugees settle. To be clear, these are refugees who are fleeing persecution around the world, including Rohingya and Uyghur refugees admitted through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, Cubans who are fleeing the oppressive regime there, and Ukrainians who are fleeing the war. Making sure we can adequately support the resettlement of these refugee populations isn't just the right thing to do, it also supports important national security and strategic interests. So let's talk about serious bipartisan ideas to address these challenges, and let's be clear, tackling everything from the child care crisis to the opioid crisis and beyond requires more than supplemental funding. It requires us to pass are strong, full-year appropriations bills like this committee has put forward. When we operate on one CR after another, our agencies are stuck in neutral. They cannot plan for the future. They have to delay initiatives and investments, and they are far less equipped to meet the pressing challenges we face. Just about every national security official has told us it hamstrings their work to keep America safe. So I hope we can continue to make bipartisan progress on supplemental funding to respond to the urgent needs at home and abroad, and our annual appropriations bills to set up our nation for success in the year ahead. As we talked about last week, there are some pressing needs across the world right now, but there's no reason for that to stop us from responding to needs right here at home, too. At such a crucial moment, we cannot afford to treat this as a zero-sum game. We are the United States of America. We can, we should, and we must stand with our allies around the world and tackle the challenges our families face here at home. I strongly believe that, and I'm going to continue doing everything I can to make sure we rise to the occasion and provide all the resources necessary to meet this moment. I will turn it over to Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you very much, Chair Murray, for holding this second hearing on the administration's supplemental budget requests. I look forward to hearing the testimony of both Secretary Mayorkas and Secretary Becerra on the President's emergency supplemental requests for their departments, just as last week we heard from the Department of Defense and the Department of State. Before I address the focus of this hearing, let me personally thank both secretaries for their responses to the horrific shootings that occurred in my state, in Lewiston. Secretary Mayorkas deployed nearly 100 personnel from various DHS components to assist state and local officials and the affected families. Thank you for that. The Department of Health and Human Services personnel offered critical behavioral and mental health services in the wake of this tragedy. I'm grateful for these efforts. Turning to the President's supplemental appropriations request, I look forward to discussing with both secretaries what is required to provide effective border security to stem the flood of illegal migrants and fentanyl into the United States. For fiscal year 2023, the U.S. Border Patrol reported a record 2.5 million encounters with foreign nationals entering the United States along the southwest border without authorization. Think about that number. That means that there were nearly twice as many encounters at the southwest border as there are people in the entire state of Maine. And that enormous number does not include what Border Patrol agents describe as the gotaways, those who did not turn themselves in and eluded capture. Communities throughout our country are struggling to absorb the influx of migrants as they are released pending an adjudication of their claims, a process that can take years. In Portland, Maine, a city of 68,000 residents, more than 1,600 asylum seekers have arrived since January. Sanford, Maine, which has a population of 22,000, has had nearly 400 migrants arrive since the month of May. The cost for Sanford, a much smaller city, to provide food and housing assistance to recently arrived asylum seekers is more than 3 times as much as the city spends for residents needing assistance. Not only has the failure to control the border led to unchecked migration, but also it has contributed to the illegal drug crisis. Mexican drug cartels are using the chaos at the southern border to facilitate their trafficking operations, using cars, trucks, and other modes of distribution They are sending record amounts of fentanyl into our country, enough to kill every American many times over. Maine, like so many other states, has seen record increases in recent years in the number of overdose deaths, nearly 80% of which are fentanyl related. We lost 462 Mainers in the first 9 months of 2023 to fatal overdoses. 341 of these deaths are fentanyl related. An out-of-control border poses a real threat to our homeland and our people. Since fiscal year 2021, 282 individuals apprehended by Border Patrol at the southwestern border were on the terrorist watch list, compared to only 11 such individuals in the previous 4 years. Additional resources are necessary, but they're only part of the answer to these national security and public health crises. Targeted funding must be accompanied by policy changes that ensure that our borders are secure, that our immigration system is not exploited, and that is fair to those who legally immigrate. And let me be clear, immigrants who have come to our country legally have contributed greatly to the fabric of our economy and our communities. I very much look forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Collins. We will now very briefly introduce today's witnesses and move to their testimony. I'm very pleased today to welcome Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, and Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. Thank you to each of you for coming today and taking your time to be with us and to answer our questions. And we will now begin with opening remarks. Secretary Becerra will begin with you.
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Collins, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's emergency supplemental funding request for the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm pleased to be here with Secretary Mayorkas to answer your questions. We work closely and depend on each other regularly to address critical domestic priorities and national security interests. At HHS, we're working to lower healthcare costs with better care for more Americans. Among our top priorities are strengthening behavioral health and addressing the overdose epidemic. We're making meaningful progress on these issues, thanks in large part to the past support from Congress. But to continue that forward movement will require ongoing attention and adequate funding. The President's emergency supplemental funding request proposes $22.2 billion for HHS. The largest and most urgent request, $16 billion, will ensure millions of American families do not lose access to affordable child care. Emergency funding will also be deployed to help local communities battle the scourge of opioids, including illicitly manufactured fentanyl. The President's request will fund critical heating and energy assistance to households as we quickly approach the cold of winter. And these funds would make sure our system supporting refugees, including our Afghan and Ukrainian brothers and sisters, continue to support our state and local partners. Finally, and of course, our request ensures that communities, first responders, and survivors of tragedy will continue to receive customary disaster recovery and response services through HHS. Whether it was the residents of Maui devastated by the wildfires, the people in Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and South Carolina whose homes and livelihoods were ripped apart by dangerous storms, or the families of Allen, Texas, Monterey, California, and most recently, Lewiston, Maine, shattered by mass shootings, our recovery and response teams were there for them. If there is one thing that is sadly predictable, it's that there will be more disasters in the future. With your support, HHS will be ready. Childcare. Madam Chair, you said it. Childcare in this country is either unaffordable or unavailable for millions of Americans. The average cost of childcare ranges from $5,000 to over $17,000 a year, depending on where you are in the country. That's like college tuition for most families, but for kids who haven't even started kindergarten. Prices are untenable for families, even in the lowest priced areas. Providers, meanwhile, operate on thin margins, and childcare workers receive disgracefully low wages, lower than almost any other occupation. Child care stabilization funds helped raise wages for workers. Parents need affordable, high-quality child care options so they can work or go to school or participate in training programs or simply support their families. It is vital to the success of our communities. It is vital to our economy. To many families who are forced to choose between keeping their paycheck or caring for the child, can you imagine trying to sleep at night? The President's American Rescue Plan in 2021 made it possible for child care programs to stay open during the worst of the pandemic. And here I have to thank so many of you who worked so hard to get those child care funds. Hundreds of thousands of child care providers and millions of children benefited from the ARP's child care stabilization grants. Left unaddressed, the crisis in our child care system threatens to undermine our progress as a nation. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of kids and parents in each of your states could lose out on coverage unless Congress commits to additional funds. The emergency funding request would shore up the child care sector and mitigate the likelihood that providers will close their doors or raise child care fees for families in the face of a child care workforce shortage. As with child care, the urgent and emergent challenges we must address on opioids and fentanyl and in meeting our legal obligations to our newest Americans require all of government approaches. For that reason, we come before you with the President's emergency supplemental request. I'm grateful for Congress recognizing the importance of these issues, and I look forward to discussing our emergency funding request with you. I yield back.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas.
Thank you, Chair Murray, Vice Chair Collins, distinguished members of this committee. Every day, the 260,000 men and women of the Department of Homeland Security enforce our laws, secure our border, and safeguard our communities. They have seized more fentanyl in the last 2 years than in the previous 5 years combined. They have removed or returned from the United States more than 350,000 non-citizens since the ending of pandemic-era rules under Title 42. They have arrested the leaders of transnational criminal organizations and are disrupting and dismantling the smuggling organizations that exploit the vulnerable. They help families everywhere, from Hawaii and Mississippi to Florida and Vermont, rebuild after the devastation of a natural disaster. They support communities during tragedies, like the one that struck Lewiston 2 weeks ago, and get local stakeholders across the country the resources they need to help prevent another such attack. They do all of this and much more, despite being perennially underfunded and inadequately resourced. That is why our administration has submitted the critical supplemental border and homeland security funding requests we are here to discuss today. It would be a disservice to the American people and to the men and women who safeguard our homeland not to approve it. Consider fentanyl. Drug overdoses have been a leading cause of preventable American deaths every year for a decade, driven over the past 5+ years by this incredibly cheap, incredibly potent opioid, smuggled into our country by cartels, primarily via cars and trucks driven by American citizens. Our administration has repeatedly asked Congress to help us modernize our ports of entry to ensure we can expedite lawful trade and travel and focus our efforts on bad actors. We continue to call on Congress to fully fund the personnel and resources needed to achieve this goal, and to fully deploy new imaging technology to enhance our ability to inspect all vehicles and trucks that enter our country. Our national security supplemental funding request will help do so, sending 1,000 additional officers and investigators to ports of entry, deploying over 100 cutting-edge detection machines across hotspots, and funding additional international anti-trafficking operations. We are facing economic, political, and climate instability across the world, exacerbated in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, instability that is fueling the greatest level of global migration since World War II. This is also true in our hemisphere. Despite operating under the constraints of a broken immigration system that Congress has failed to update since 1996, our administration has pursued a comprehensive strategy to manage this unprecedented migration. Our strategy includes expanded lawful pathways for migration, strengthened consequences for unlawful entry at the border, removing a record number of individuals found to be ineligible for protection under the law, and increased partnership across the region to curb irregular migration. The same supplemental funding request will increase these efforts, enabling the hiring and deployment of 1,300 new Border Patrol agents, 1,400 attorneys and staff to support immigration cases, and 2,700 new asylum officers and staff. It will expand our capacity for safe and humane border enforcement. It will provide $1.4 billion to communities that need additional support and expedite the issuance of work authorization documents for eligible non-citizens. Within our homeland, extreme heat, wildfires, and devastating hurricanes are increasing in frequency and severity, and Congress's support of FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund has not kept pace. Our domestic supplemental funding request would allocate $9 billion to the Disaster Relief Fund, enabling us to deploy more first responders and better support recovery projects whenever and wherever disaster strikes. In the wake of the horrific Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel on October 7, we have seen an increase in threats against Jewish, Muslim, and Arab American communities and institutions across our country, adding to a pre-existing increase in the level of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. Our department's nonprofit security grant program requires additional support to meet this new mandate. The domestic supplemental funding request would do so, providing the program an additional $200 million and allowing us to help mitigate violent extremist and terrorist attacks. Ensuring the safety and security of the American people must be more than just a talking point. We owe those who protect our country better. We owe them the funding, resources, and support needed to do their dangerous and difficult jobs. We owe them this supplemental funding package. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our administration's proposal with you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much to both of our witnesses this morning. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions of our witnesses, and I ask my colleagues to keep track of your clock and stay within those 5 minutes. Secretary Becerra, as I talked about in my opening remarks, we have a child care crisis in this country, and it is an economic crisis that is really worsening. When the pandemic hit and the child care sector was pushed to the verge of collapse, Congress recognized the need to act, and we delivered the stabilization funding to make sure those programs could stay open and keep prices down and continue serving our families. It worked. And the stabilization program provided funding in 8 to 10 licensed child care programs across the country and to nearly 7,000 programs just in my home state of Washington, and served nearly 10 million children nationwide. But that funding expired September 30th. And unless we take action, more parents are going to be forced out of the workplace, small businesses are going to be left without the employees they need, and families, along with our entire economy, are really going to feel the consequences. So it's important that the administration has requested this funding to continue to stabilize the child care system. Can you talk to us about the consequences that it would be to working families and our economy if we fail to extend this funding?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for all the work that you and your colleagues have done to place us where we are today with funds like the stabilization funds that you passed in, last year. It's just in the definition of the word. If we don't have those stabilization funds, we destabilize not just families across America, but our economy, because there will be people who have to leave the workforce because they'll have to stay home to care for their kids. There are small businesses. The vast majority of our child care programs are small businesses. They will go under. There are people who are already telling us that they relied on the stabilization funds to be able to increase wages for their workers so that they wouldn't leave. Remember, they're competing against the fast food shops, the Walmarts of the world, who pay more in many cases than they do. They were able to increase wages a bit to try to keep those workers who prefer to care for kids. It would be devastating. There is no doubt that Americans would lose not only income, but opportunities for their kids, and we would lose a lot of small businesses in America.
Thank you. And another one of my top priorities is the fentanyl crisis. And just last year, there were nearly 110,000 drug overdose deaths, fueled in large part by fentanyl. In Washington State, fentanyl is driving the increasing rate of overdose deaths among children and teens. Making sure synthetic opioids like fentanyl do not cross our borders is really important, and I know the administration is focused on this. It ramped up its efforts and conducted successful operations that have resulted in an additional 10,000 pounds of fentanyl seized over a 2-month period. That's roughly a 17% increase above the preceding months. But seizing those drugs alone will not solve the problem for communities that are really ravaged by this crisis. Secretary Becerra, I'll start with you, and then to you, Secretary Mayorkas. Talk to us about additional funding through the HHS will address the harm our communities are facing.
Madam Chair, there's not a state or not a community in America that doesn't need more assistance to tackle the opioid crisis, now driven mostly by fentanyl. Some 70% of these overdoses as a result of opioids are really now driven by fentanyl. We need to do much more, they will tell you. We can help with the prevention and the treatment. Secretary Mayorkas, I know we'll talk about the interdiction, but without the help, we're going to lose Americans. We know it, and we're doing everything we can for making naloxone more available to people to save lives, but also working with those on the ground who've been saving lives from day one. We want them to have the resources they need.
Thank you. And Secretary Mayorkas, what will the President's supplemental request allow you to do to stop fentanyl from entering our country?
Chair Murray, it will assist us significantly in our interdiction efforts. We already have done an extraordinary job. The men and women of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and Homeland Security investigations have engaged in a number of operations, Operation Blue Lotus, Operation Artemis, which is surging our personnel and our technological resources to the ports of entry where the majority of the fentanyl is smuggled into our country. We are working with our international partners. The $1.3 billion that the supplemental request calls for will assist us with additional personnel, additional technological resources, and the ability to work with our international partners to really drive an encompassing approach to our interdiction efforts.
Thank you, Vice Chair Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Mayorkas, you mentioned that it had been since 1996 since Congress passed comprehensive immigration reform. The supplemental request includes funding to help strengthen enforcement, but it does not appear to include any policy reforms. Is the administration open to working with Congress to include policy reforms that would deal with the underlying reasons for the surge as we consider the supplemental?
Vice Chair Collins, we need the funding that we are requesting immediately, that we are requesting in the supplemental. We have advocated from day one for immigration reform. It is unanimous that our broken immigration system is in dire need of reform. On the very first day of his administration, President Biden presented Congress with a blueprint for that reform. We fully endorse the need for policy changes, not in piecemeal form, but in a comprehensive form.
Let me turn to the supplemental funding request. You mentioned that there is funding for new technology and an additional 1,000 personnel at ports of entry. However, the request omits funding for border security technology between ports of entry, which is, in my view, a major problem. You said just last month that effective border security requires a smarter, more comprehensive approach, including state-of-the-art border surveillance technology. With encounters between ports of entry at an all-time high, do you support adding funding for border security technology between ports of entry, where most people are coming through?
Vice Chair Collins, we certainly do, and our annual budget does indeed call for that type of technology, including, for example, automated surveillance towers, the ASTs that are so effective and that are force multipliers. What we have sought in this supplemental is to address the most emergent needs. For example, additional Border Patrol agents and critically additional case processors so that we can push those agents out into the field to do the jobs that they were sworn to do.
We are working on the funding that you've requested, and I hope that we can work together to address some real concerns about the funding request, as well as the policy issues that I've mentioned. Secretary Becerra, you're asking for an additional $1.9 billion for the Office of Refugee Resettlement, yet your fiscal year 2024 budget request was for an increase of only about $830 million. Now, it's been clear since long before the budget was released that the number of unaccompanied children, refugees, and other entrants was growing, and that ORR would need additional funding. Given those facts, why didn't you request more funding through the normal budget process?
Senator, thank you for the question. As you know, and as Secretary Mayorkas can attest, it is never a known commodity or quantity, the number of people that will show up, the number of refugees that will need help. We are still, for example, receiving Ukrainian refugees. We thought 100,000 refugees might come to our shores. We're now over 180,000, and we think that we may, our estimates are, projections are, that we may have another 80,000 Ukrainians who may be coming in. What we have to do is continue our obligation that this country has always had to those who seek protection from persecution when they come to our shores. Without that support, and this money is focused on refugees, without that support, the services we provide in partnership with local communities would really suffer, but local communities would still have to provide that support.
Finally, Mr. Secretary, I've long been a strong supporter of improving access to quality, affordable child care. I don't think extending pandemic subsidies is the way to do that. Instead, I've focused on expanding the Child Care Development Block Grant Program. We increased funding last year by 30%. This year's under Senator Capito and Senator Schatz, we've increased, Senator Baldwin, sorry, we've increased the funding by another 9%. Wouldn't it be better to invest additional child care funds in a program that directly helps subsidize child care costs for low-income families?
Senator, my staff can be in your office immediately after this hearing if you'd like to discuss how we get there, because you're absolutely right. We need a long-term solution. I think most everyone sitting at the dais would say that. But while we get to that long-term solution, we need something for those small businesses that are going to close tomorrow. We need something for those parents who are looking for a quality child care service today. And without the stabilization funds, we will lose ground, we will lose businesses, we will lose families having care for their kids.
Thank you.
Senator Durbin.
Thank you, thank you, Chair Murray, and thanks to both secretaries for being here today. Secretary Mayorkas, you said something in your opening statement which I want to return to, and that is the majority of narcotics and fentanyl coming into the United States comes in through ports of entry transported by U.S. citizens. Is that correct?
That is correct. I believe it's more than 90%.
More than 90%. More than 90% comes through ports of entry transported by U.S. citizens. As Willie Sutton, when asked why he robbed banks, said it's because that's where the money is. Isn't it pretty clear that that's where we ought to focus our efforts, at least our startup efforts, to deal with this fentanyl crisis?
Most certainly, Senator, and that is indeed where we are focusing our energies, both with respect to the deployment of technology and the law enforcement operations that we undertake.
So is the Biden administration putting their money where their mouth is in terms of asking for money that will help you fight the fentanyl crisis at the border?
We most certainly are.
Does it include not only increased numbers of personnel, but also new technology?
Yes, it does, Senator. The non-intrusive inspection technology, which is so effective in scanning vehicles of all types.
Well, I certainly agree with Senator Collins. We should be concerned at the other 10% that's coming across the border. What are we doing about that?
We are deploying our personnel to the fullest extent possible to interdict narcotics. We need our CUAS authority reauthorized. That's our counter-drone authority. The cartels seek to smuggle drugs via drones in between the ports of entry. Our counter-UAS authority expires before the end of this year. We need that dramatically.
Now, that's something we can do that makes a difference immediately.
Yes, indeed.
And certainly the administration's request for more money when it comes to fentanyl intervention at the real source is time and money well spent, correct?
It is. It saves lives.
Now let's talk about the other issue before us. We have been, during the Biden administration, overwhelmed at the border by the numbers who have come in or tried to enter into the United States. Is that correct as well?
The numbers have been unprecedented, Senator.
And can you tell me your explanation as to why that occurred?
Senator, that is not something that is specific to the southern border of the United States. That is a global phenomenon. We have the largest number of displaced people in the world today since World War II. And that is something that is gripping our entire hemisphere. There are approximately 2 million Venezuelans seeking shelter in Colombia. We have an unprecedented gang problem in Ecuador that is causing an unprecedented number of Ecuadorians to flee. We have a situation in Haiti, which is dire. This is something that involves corruption, poverty, violence, natural disasters. We are, and in a post-COVID environment, we're seeing just a level of migration throughout our hemisphere.
The first item suggested by the Republicans, if we are going to discuss immigration, is a 900-mile addition to the wall between the United States and Mexico. Can you comment on the impact of such a wall, what it might cost, how long it takes to build?
It costs billions and billions of dollars. It takes years and years to build, and it is not as effective as a multi-pronged strategy that includes critically latest technological advancements. We need a 21st century solution to what we are experiencing as a 21st century problem. It is not the time for brick and mortar. We need to meet the moment with technological innovation and our extraordinary personnel.
Let me just close by saying I've spent a large part of my Senate career on the issue of immigration. As chairman of the Judiciary Committee, it's in my jurisdiction, and I've been frustrated that we've been unable to initiate a true bipartisan effort to solve our immigration challenges and the crisis we face today. I was with the Gang of Eight, several members of this committee as well, that produced a comprehensive immigration reform which passed the Senate, was never taken up by the Republican House. I am ready to sit down again and make that work. This notion that we have to do significant immigration reform in the next few weeks or we won't send money to assist the people in Ukraine or other causes important to our national security, I think is mistaken. I agree with the chairman who said pinning our efforts in this critical area of supplemental appropriation on comprehensive reform is really not realistic. I do want to undertake that in a serious way, and I'm sure you'll join in that effort if we do.
I most certainly will, Senator.
I yield.
Thank you. Senator Graham.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was also in the Gang of Eight, and to my Democratic colleagues, securing your border is part of the problem. We have to do more. I get that. The challenge before us is to help Ukraine. It's to help Israel. I want to do that. Majority of people in my party think Ukraine, we've done enough. I don't. If you want me to be able to vote for this, you're going to have to help me deal with the following question. Why are you so intent on helping Ukraine? You're not doing much about our own country when we have a border that's completely broken. I reject the idea this is a global phenomenon problem. I think you're misdiagnosing the problem. This is policy changes y'all instituted that I told you wouldn't work, and we now need to fix that. Trend lines, 2020, 458,000 encounters, 2023, 2.5 million. We need to change that, don't we, that trend line?
We most certainly do, which
Okay,
is precisely.
fair enough, fair enough.
2019 is an important year as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm worried about tomorrow. The highest encounters was in September. Things need to change, you agree, like now?
Indeed, and that is
Okay, all right,
precisely
great.
why we have sought our supplemental funding and why
I
we
just think
continue
your
to.
supplemental makes everything worse, not better. Okay, next. You said something I want to agree with. You told Senator Langford that basically the asylum system needs to be reformed from top to bottom. Do you still stand by that?
I do.
Okay. What's the denial rate of asylum claims?
Well, Senator, we'd have to break it down. The asylum system has an initial screening rate. As you know, the credible
I think
fear.
the final determination is about 90% of the claims are eventually denied. Am I in the ballpark?
Senator, I believe that is inaccurate.
Okay, well,
I
what
also think
percentage of claims
It
are?
also depends on the demographics.
No,
This
I'm
is-
asking you a simple question. You're the head of DHS, and you can't tell me how many asylum claims are approved versus denied.
Generally speaking, across the board on a macro basis, it's approximately 75%.
Okay, so if 75% are denied, would you work with me to change the initial screening standard?
Senator, I will work with you to achieve a comprehensive solution because a piecemeal solution will lead to remaining
Well,
problems.
if you're expecting comprehensive immigration reform between now, that's not going to happen. Will you work with me to fix the asylum system?
Senator, I will continue to work with you to fix the immigration system that
Okay.
is fundamentally
Let's
broken.
parole. How many people, here's the law of parole. The DHS Secretary may, in his discretion, parole people in the United States temporarily under such conditions as he may prescribe only on a case-by-case basis for urgent humanitarian reasons or significant public benefit. There were 240,000 people paroled this fiscal year. Did you do a case-by-case analysis?
Senator, we comply with the law.
So there is a file for all 240,000 where somebody determined they meet these two criteria
There is an individualized determination made by
on
our
all
personnel.
240,000. And I can see that.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, I'm asking for that.
Very well,
So in
Senator.
your opinion, 240,000 people were individually screened and granted parole. You're not blanket paroling people, are you?
That is correct, Senator.
So is your testimony under oath that you're not giving blanket parole from people from 4 countries?
Senator, we have
Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba,
and Haiti.
and Haiti. So you're telling me that you've looked at every person and you gave them parole on an individual screening basis. Is
Senator.
that what your testimony is?
Senator, we have a parole program.
No. Did you do what I asked you? Did you follow the law or are you giving blanket parole?
We follow the law.
Okay. The law requires an individual assessment.
Senator, we make our decisions on a case-by-case basis.
There's 280-something people on the terrorist watch list that we know of. Where are they?
Senator, the terrorist screening data set,
Where are the people?
the individuals whom we encounter that are on the terrorist screening data set
Are they out of the country?
are screened.
Are they out of the country or are they in the country?
Senator, they very well may be out of the country.
But you
They may
don't
be-
know. There are people on the terrorist watch list, and you can't tell me where they're at.
That is not my testimony.
Well, okay, where are they?
Senator, if you would allow me
Yeah, please.
the opportunity to answer. Individuals who are encountered at the southern border,
Okay,
who are in the terrorist screening data set,
okay.
may not necessarily be known or suspected terrorists, number one. Number two, individuals who pose a threat to our national security are an enforcement priority for us. They are the priority that are subject to removal. Also, if we make a determination that it would not be safe to the American people that they be released into the United States, we detain them pending their removal
Can you give me an
proceedings.
analysis of all 200? I know over time. Do you think you're doing a good job?
Senator, I'm incredibly proud to support the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security.
I didn't ask about them. I asked
That is my
about
answer.
you.
That is my answer.
Okay, well, I think we need to change this system, and you're completely out of touch with the nature of the problem.
Senator, I very much look forward to working with you to change the system.
Thank you. Senator Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First, let me address Secretary Becerra. Secretary Becerra, this issue has come up by my colleagues also. That's the LIHEAP program. We expect this winter heating prices to go up. We expect the number of people seeking assistance to go up. So the administration's supplemental request of $1.6 billion seems to be a step in the right direction. Do you have any additional comments in terms of how we can help people in this heating season?
Senator, first, thank you and many of your colleagues for the work that you've done to make sure that we can keep pace, because essentially what the President is requesting is to keep pace with you and many of your colleagues were able to secure last year. So we're not getting more money. We're just trying to make sure we don't fall behind because, as you know, the cost of heating is going up. The global energy crisis and the global climate crisis are having an impact for families. And so this money simply makes sure that during the dead of winter, people don't die, as we know they do, if they don't have the money to pay for heating expenses.
Well, thank you very much. And Secretary Mayorkas, could you explain the procedures at the border when you encounter someone who is on a list of possible
Senator, we screen and vet individuals whom we encounter at the border. If an individual is determined to be a public safety threat or a threat to our national security, they are a priority for removal. If we do not believe it is safe to release an individual when they are subject to immigration enforcement proceedings, then we detain them in immigration and customs enforcement facilities. That is pursuant to the policy memorandum that I promulgated on September 30th of 2021.
Now, if an individual reaches the border, your emphasis is to sort of presume, if there's any doubt at all, the worst, and to hold that person. Is that a fair?
We make an individualized determination. Our U.S. Customs and Border Protection personnel are expert in doing so. We screen and vet individuals against a number of holdings across the federal enterprise, and we make a decision of custody or not custody, depending on the profile of the individual and our professional assessment based on the information we have.
And those individuals who are paroled in the United States have basically cleared this process. And in fact, typically, as I understand it, they have sponsors that will accept them, and the sponsors are also evaluated for their credibility and their reliability. Is that accurate?
That is correct, Senator.
And in fact, in many cases, the sponsors are religious organizations. That's my understanding.
There are religious organizations, there are faith-based organizations, there are nonprofit organizations, there are businesses, and there are individuals as well that serve as sponsors for parolees from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, or Venezuela. But we do indeed screen the individual potential parolees as well.
And do you have a feedback loop with local law enforcement authorities about the behavior of these individuals in the United States?
We work very closely with our state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement partners.
Well, thank you very much. Secretary Becerra, again, this issue is touched on, but I think it's critical. We learned in the pandemic that child care was not something nice to have. It was essential in order to get to work, in order to maintain really family coherence and being able to succeed. We provided additional resources in ARPA to do that. Those resources have been exhausted. So now we have to go ahead, and I believe we are doing that in this legislation, $16 billion request to help our child care system. In Rhode Island, a local organization's calculated that child care in my state is unaffordable for 90% of families. It means that it costs more than 7% of total income. And the irony, of course, is child care workers are paid about $13 an hour, which is not exactly extravagant. So we have this dilemma. That's why I think we need to get this money out as quickly as possible. Can you comment?
I fully concur, and to save not just those families, but our economy, we should get to work and getting those monies out there. It was used, those stabilization dollars kept businesses afloat and kept families with decent quality childcare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you. Thank you and the ranking member, the vice chairman, for hosting this hearing. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for agreeing with us. Thank you for agreeing to be here, and welcome to Secretary Becerra as well. I indicated in my opening remarks last week in this room about the importance of your presence, in my view, for us to deal with a supplemental dealing with national security. And I continue to believe that the circumstances we face on our borders and elsewhere around our country continue to be a national security challenge for us. I've been to the border numerous times, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, in each circumstance, and conversations with law enforcement, federal and local, as well as my own view in talking to Border Patrol agents and seeing firsthand the apprehension of foreign nationals on our border, including those from China. I am anxious for our efforts to deal with Israel and Ukraine and the challenges we face in the Middle East, but I'm also interested in making certain that we take this opportunity, this supplemental, to come together. We've heard in this conversation this morning by a number of my colleagues how they've worked on immigration reform, border security issues reform without success. And I would hate for us to miss an opportunity in this circumstance if we can put a package together that would be supported by Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and in the House. We have seen the largest increase in migrants crossing our borders, unfortunately, in the past few years. There's many push and pull factors that would contribute to that circumstance, including deterioration of conditions in other countries, as you indicated in your opening statement. But I'm also concerned about what appears to be an attitude toward immigration pull factors, the policy decisions that suggest to migrants that making the dangerous, life-threatening journey to and across our southern border will be rewarded by being released in the United States, being rewarded by a no hearing, no ultimate outcome determination. And you recently wrote, in an opinion, it was on the board here, that Senator Graham indicated he agreed with your statement, only Congress can bring immigration and border security systems into the 21st century. Are there not things that can be done in this supplemental that can address that, at least in part, that we can reach an agreement on with the administration and Republicans and Democrats in the Senate? And also, how would you change those migrants seeking asylum to present themselves at legal points of entry, limitations on parole, stricter punishment of visa overstays, to limit those pull factors and to reduce illegal immigration?
Senator, thank you very much for the opportunity. The supplemental funding request that we have submitted would assist us tremendously in our border enforcement efforts with respect to the hiring and deployment of personnel, the procurement and implementation of technology. What we need is an encompassing solution to an encompassing problem when we speak of policy changes. For example, the backlog in immigration court proceedings has been building year over year over year for at least 10 years. That is why the time in between encounter and final adjudication of an immigration enforcement case is years and years long when we speak of a pull factor. And if, in fact, we had a path to legalization for the millions of people who've been contributing so much to this country, we would so acutely alleviate the immigration court backlog, shrink the time in between encounter and final adjudication. So it really requires a comprehensive approach to what is such a comprehensive problem.
Well, Mr. Secretary, while I might agree that comprehensive reform or changes are advantageous, it has been my experience in my entire time in Congress that we keep waiting for comprehensive reform, and as a result, we do next to nothing. And I hope that you, the administration, will use this opportunity to seriously work with those of us who are willing to make changes to defeat this circumstance in our national security, this challenge, at least in the things that we can agree upon today. Continue to work on the things that we can't agree upon. Otherwise, my entire time in Congress will be waiting for comprehensive reform. Thank you.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. Appreciate you holding the hearing. I want to thank you both for being here. Look, my top priority is defending Montana and keeping our nation safe. It's just that plain and simple. That means getting the situation at the southern border under control. I have said this directly to you many times before, Secretary Mayorkas, and I reiterated to the President Biden last week. This administration needs to do more to secure our border. You guys have to do a better job prioritizing additional funding and the resources that Congress gives you to stop the deadly flow of fentanyl, which you talked about in your opening statement. Fentanyl that is taking the lives of Montanans and folks all across this country. When I talk to Border Patrol agents or men and women in law enforcement, they tell me the same thing. They need more manpower. They need more technology. We have to know who's coming into a country and what they're bringing, and that starts with the folks on the ground and giving them the tools they need to get the job done. I do agree with some of my Republican colleagues here today in that in addition to additional border secure funding, Congress must also step up and pass bipartisan policy reforms to fix this broken immigration system. Congress needs to stop playing politics with the border. Congress needs to roll up their sleeves, and we need to do our part to implement meaningful solutions to address the chaos at our border, address workforce issues, and keep our country safe. So, Secretary Mayorkas, I have taken a look at your supplemental funding request. I see money to hire agents, to detain and remove folks, to install more technology, to combat fentanyl. But what in your proposal is actually going to plug the holes in our border to stop those intent on illegally entering the United States?
Senator, I think it is precisely what you have identified and what our supplemental contains. When we talk about hiring, for example, additional personnel to conduct the case processing, that means we can get more Border Patrol agents out into the field, which is where they belong to do the jobs they swore to do and they signed up to do, which is apprehend individuals who are seeking to evade law enforcement. Hiring additional Border Patrol agents accomplishes that as well. The technology that we seek to deploy, it is force multiplying. And so all of the things that we include in our supplemental achieve precisely the outcome about which you inquire.
So I will tell you what I was told about the supplemental. I thought it was very helpful, but didn't see a lot that would directly impact the areas in between the station. Your testimony last month, I believe in front of the HISCAC committee, said that in FY23 there was about 600,000 people that entered this country illegally. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Do you feel confident in this supplemental that you can shut that down? Those 600,000 that were coming in, do you have faith that you'll be able to significantly reduce that number?
I do.
And do you have any goals in mind there? And you anticipate you'll be able to do it with manpower and technology, I assume?
Manpower and technology, yes, will significantly advance our efforts. Senator, as you well know, you and I have spoken over the years, the phenomenon of gotaways has been a challenge ever since our department was created. In fact, in the first decade of our creation, the number of gotaways was far in excess of what we are experiencing now. But personnel and technology are the two key elements to that effort.
I would just tell you that it is really, really important, and I think in a bipartisan way, really, really important, especially considering what all has gone on in this world, that we know exactly who's coming across that line. And if this supplemental does that, we will hold you accountable to that.
Senator, let me be clear. The supplemental will assist us in advancing our mission dramatically. It is the funding that we require in addition to our annual funding. We also need the system fixed. It is not just funding that will cure all of the challenges. We need our immigration system fixed. The president submitted a proposal on day one of this administration. We have to work on that and build on that. That, too, is a critical element to meet our challenge.
I couldn't agree with you more. We need it fixed. And I think we need to come together. We need to fund Israel funding. We need to fund Ukraine funding. We need to stop playing politics, and we need to get it fixed. We need to help you do your job, and then we need you hold you accountable to do that job. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Mayorkas, how many people have entered the country illegally across our southern border since the Biden administration took office? A number.
Senator, it's over 6 million encounters at our southern border.
And how many of those 6 million are still in the country?
Senator, I can get you that information.
So do you know?
Senator, I don't want to
Would you provide us with a number of how many of those 6 million that crossed our border illegally are still in the country?
I would be pleased to provide you with any data that you request, Senator.
Of the 2.5 million that crossed our southern border illegally last year, how many of them remain in the country?
Again, Senator, I'd be very pleased to provide you with the data with respect to how many removals have been effected, how many voluntary removals, how many forced removovals, how many expulsions, how many individuals
But
are
you
in
came to the hearing
immigration.
today and you don't have those numbers? You are the head of DHS and you came to this hearing today without those numbers.
That is correct, and I'd be pleased to provide you with that data. We certainly have it at our disposal.
We've asked for them before and we haven't got them, so we'll be looking forward to getting them. Do you think that millions of people crossing our border illegally creates the risk of a terrorist attack in our country?
Senator, I think that the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security do an extraordinary job of ensuring the safety and security
That wasn't
of
the question I
American.
asked. I said, do you think that millions of people crossing our border illegally every year, 2.5 million last year, creates the risk of a terrorist with what's going on in the world, people coming from more than 100 different countries crossing here illegally? You don't even know how many of them are still here. You came here today without that information. Do you think that creates a risk of a terrorist attack in our country?
Senator, you mischaracterized my testimony.
Yes or no? Do you think that creates millions of people come here, are here illegally? We're not even talking about the gotaways. How many gotaways are in our country here illegally? Does that create the risk of a terrorist attack in our country? Simple question.
Let me assure you, Senator, that the safety and security of the American people is the single highest priority of the Department of Homeland Security.
So you would say it does create a risk?
Senator, we look
Do you believe that border security is national security? This supplemental is about security, right? It's about making sure that we have a secure, not only secure country, but that we lead in terms of security for freedom-loving people in the world. Don't we start with national security here at home? Border security? Is border security part of national security?
Senator, border security is indeed part of Homeland Security and national security.
If that is the case, then as Senator Graham said, as Senator Moran said, don't we need to make sure that as we look at this supplemental, we have security for our southern border as part of what's included?
Absolutely, Senator. This supplemental.
So we do need to have that in the package.
This supplemental, Senator, advances our security mission by enabling us to hire the personnel and the technology.
I understand. Now, if you agree that we need to secure the southern border as part of this package, and I just went through a lot of metrics, and you don't know the answers to it. You're sitting here today, and you did not give me the numbers. You say, well, I'll go get the numbers. Gee whiz, I don't have them here today. I don't know what they are. If we're going to have security in this package, don't we need some metrics so we can show the American people that, in fact, we are reducing the encounters. We are reducing the number of people that are here illegally. We are reducing the number of people on the terrorist watch list that are coming across. We are reducing the number of gotaways. We need metrics to show that, don't we?
Yes.
So you would agree that that needs to be part of this supplemental package?
Senator.
Would you agree with that or not? You just said we need to secure the border as part of the package.
I'm not sure what your question is now.
We need some kind of metrics and tracking to show that we are in fact reducing the number of people coming here and staying here illegally as part of this supplemental package. Do you agree or not agree with that?
Senator, we can discuss what metrics are best to show the progress that we make, whether it is
Of
funding.
course, we'll discuss it. The question is whether we need to include it. Do you think we need some way to track that we're making progress on this problem? Look at the chart. Should that just keep going up infinitum, or should we start bringing it down? And how do you know if you don't have some metrics as part of this package?
Senator,
So do you think they ought to be included or not? It's not it's a pretty simple, straightforward question. Would you
Senator-
just answer it?
Senator, we need funding for additional personnel and technology to advance the security of the border.
Still
And
won't
that-
simply say we need the metrics to show that we're solving the problem and bringing down the number of people who come and stay here illegally.
Senator, that is not what I'm saying.
So you agree with it?
I am very pleased to confer with you to identify the metrics that show progress in our efforts to secure the border. What I am sharing with you is that this supplemental is needed to achieve that advanced border security. We need additional personnel, we need additional technology, and that does not seem to me to be particularly controversial, quite frankly.
And as you're hearing here, we're going to need some way to track that performance, that you are actually solving the problem rather than letting it continue to get worse, particularly at a time when we have to worry about terrorists coming into our country. Border security is national security. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Secretaries Becerra and Mayorkas, for being here today. I want to stay on the metrics question because Secretary Mayorkas, as we've heard this morning, most of the discussion about our borders has to do with the southern border. But in fact, what we're seeing is increased encounters across our northern border as well. And in particular, the Border Patrol's Swanton sector, which covers, as you know, 5 counties in New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire, over to Maine, has seen more than a 500% increase in encounters between 2022 and 2023. Now, the Border Patrol does not keep this data disaggregated for Vermont and New Hampshire. Our office has been requesting the number of encounters that have taken place in New Hampshire over the last year, and we are being told that that information is not something that can be provided to us. When we ask why, we were told it wasn't kept, but we keep the number of encounters so it can be disaggregated. When we ask again, we were told that there is a Freedom of Information Act case regarding these data that prevents sharing that information with my office. We've investigated the law. That's not correct. I'm not part of that case. And the Freedom of Information Act plainly states it's not a justification for withholding information from Congress. We need accurate information so that we can know how to address law enforcement issues, communication issues at our northern border, just as we do at the southern border. So, as you know, you received a letter from my office requesting this information. Can you commit that you'll get us this disaggregated information?
Senator, I commit to working with you on this. My understanding is that we do have it specific to the sector, but not broken down by state. I am looking into that with my colleagues, and I know that you have asked for this information a number of times, and I commit to working with you on that.
Thank you. We're happy to provide some people to go through the data to disaggregate New Hampshire from Vermont so that we know exactly what we're talking about. So I don't think personnel should be an issue there. One of the other challenges we're having at the northern border, and I know all of us who have states that share a border with Canada have many of these same issues, but it's the communications to have law enforcement be able to talk to each other, be able to talk to other officials, to CBP agents. And in New Hampshire, our Pittsburgh station relies on satellite internet service, which lacks the reliability of wired broadband, so that it's very hard vehicles that are entering from Canada. It's difficult to be able to make those communications work. Again, will you commit to work with us to explore solutions to address that at the northern border?
Yes, I will, Senator.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, the substance use disorder epidemic has had a heartbreaking impact across this country. New Hampshire has been one of those states that's been among the hardest hit. Last year, we had the highest number of fatal overdoses that we've had since 2017. It was a 15% increase over 2021. And I appreciate the administration's requesting supplemental state opioid response grant funding to continue to combat the epidemic. I think that's very important. One of the I think we have two challenges in a state like New Hampshire. One is we've got a cliff that we're looking at as numbers go down. We need to make sure that the funding is still going to be there, but also that there's flexibility to address how we use those funds. Can you talk about the importance of flexibility in those funds?
Absolutely, Senator, and thanks for the work that you've done to make sure that SOAR grants are available to every state because we all continue to have issues in our communities. The flexibility becomes important because Washington, D.C. doesn't know what's best for New Hampshire just as it wouldn't know what's best in California. We want those who are down on the ground in New Hampshire and California, everywhere else in the country, to know how best to address the opioids crisis. And so the SOAR grants do provide flexibility. Some places are very rural. Your state has a lot of rural communities. It's very different from my state of California, where we have very densely populated areas. And so we want to make sure that we don't set up a cookie-cutter approach that uses California as a model, which may not work well for New Hampshire. We also want to make sure that if you want to treat, your state wants to treat youth, because we're now finding that 10 to 14-year-olds, one of the highest rates of death occurs among 10 to 14-year-olds today. 10 and 10-year-olds contemplating suicide or becoming drug addicts. And so we want to make sure that a state has the flexibility to use funds to tackle the crisis with our youth. So the more flexibility on the ground locally, the better what the results will be.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all very much for having this important hearing. I had the opportunity to be chair of Homeland Security in 2017 and that period in that Congress. And as you said, the men and women of the Border Patrol are wonderful people that do a wonderful job. The reality, though, is that right now their morale's terrible. And when you talk to them, they think the policy on the border is inappropriate and is simply not working. By every metric, the border is a disaster. Despite the rhetoric of the administration, the numbers reported by the Border Patrol of caught and known getaways are off the chart. Our border states and our communities have been overrun, and now many of our major cities, most of them Democratic, are saying literally that you're in the process of destroying their cities. The polling indicates that the public agrees with all of that. They have little confidence with the administration's border policies. And so, you know, you mentioned the numbers and how it's been growing through the years. In 2017, there were 2 million people running around the country waiting for adjudication. When the Biden administration took over, there were 3.6. Now there's 6.5 million, so it's almost doubled. Right now, you've got 800,000 people that have been adjudicated waiting for their day in court. These are people that have been said that they've got probable reason for asylum. What you're asking for does nothing to get those numbers down. I mean, that's the problem. That's what Senator Hoeven was talking about. We need metrics so that once we put what you're asking for in place, that you'll have a significant reduction. And to do 800,000 people, that backlog is impossible based on what you're proposing. 6.5 million people running around waiting for some sort of adjudication. The list goes on and on. You mentioned fentanyl. I think you said, quote, that you were doing an exceptional job. It's the leading cause of death in Arkansas regarding overdoses. By July of this year, Arkansas State Police had seized 12 pounds of fentanyl, enough to kill everybody in the state. So your testimony and what is actually happening, there's no basis in fact. So I guess the question is, what are we going to do about it? I agree with Senator Hoven. We need some metrics. We need what, if we put in place what you're asking for, how's this going to address the numbers? The 6.5 million people that are running around here, how's it going to address the 800,000 backlog? And we're not talking about getting that down to, I think what you're proposing at best just keeps it as it is now. There's not going to be any reduction. Am I wrong in that?
Yes, you are.
So give me a reason for that.
Is it?
Give me some numbers.
Senator, first of all, I want to make it clear, the devastation.
Give me a reason that we're gone from 3.6 to 6.5 million.
Senator, is it your assertion that the hiring of additional Office of Principal Legal Advisor attorneys at Immigration and Customs Enforcement with a complement of additional immigration judges would not work to advance the immigration case backlog in immigration court proceedings?
I don't know. Tell me how many. Tell me how many that would do, because I think probably what that would do is just maintain where we're at right now.
That is absolutely
with
false.
The people that are coming across. Well, give me the numbers that it would do.
Senator,
make it where it is false.
Senator, I would be very pleased to confer with you and Senator Hoven to discuss the quantification of advancement that we would accomplish with additional funding. But I think it is rather axiomatic, quite frankly, that additional Border Patrol agents will advance the security mission at the southern border. I think it is rather axiomatic, quite frankly, that additional non-intrusive inspection technology at our ports of entry will advance our efforts to interdict fentanyl.
What I want to know is this. If we put your program in place, in fiscal year 24, instead of having 800,000 waiting for adjudication, what number would that be? Instead of having 6.5 million people running around here that have been running around for a long period of time, what would that number be in 24 and 25? And you should know that, because that's what we're trying to accomplish, is to make a dent in those numbers, to make a difference. I don't know if what you're proposing just simply keeps us where we're at. I don't know how it's affecting, and it's sad that you don't appear to know either. I mean, if I was bringing forward a proposal to the, and I'm sorry, but if I was bringing forward a proposal, I would know what it actually did. Okay.
Secretary Mayorkas, if you want to respond, and then I'll go to the next one.
I think I've said thank you very much, Chair Murray. I think it is rather non-controversial that the addition of personnel and technology in the system would advance the efficient operation of the system, would advance the security of the border, would advance the security of our country. And I think it is also equally axiomatic that fixing our broken immigration system, a fact about which everyone agrees, would advance it even more significantly.
Thank you,
But we are addressing the emergency of the emergent issues, the need for additional funding for our personnel and our agencies.
Thank you. Senator Merkley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me ask that same question a little bit differently. Secretary Mayorkas, if we were to acknowledge that the 4-year wait for asylum hearings is just way too long and it's a tremendous backlog, what type of resources would it take to, you've asked for $755 million for more asylum officers and immigration service officers, asylum corps and so forth, but what type of resources would it take, say over a 2 or 3 year period, to bring that 4-year backlog, say, down to 6 to 8 months or something like that? Do you have any sense of the size of the challenge? Just a short answer. I'm just trying to get a broad picture.
Senator, the funding, the additional personnel will make a material difference in that adjudicative timeline in the context of a broken immigration system. We actually issued a regulation, the asylum officer rule, that legally empowered asylum officers to make the ultimate adjudication, which also brought that 4+ year timeline down to under 18 months. So we are very intensely focused on that reparative solution that is so vital to a more functioning immigration system.
So the average timeline has dropped to 18 months?
In the context of the asylum officer rule, we did start to see tremendous acceleration.
I'll follow up with more detailed questions, because I think it's a common concern. That long wait time is, you need to have enough time for people to prepare their asylum case fairly, but not so long that is essentially years waiting while you fall in love, you have children, you get married, or whatever that complicates the whole damn system.
Agreed.
I want to turn to you, Secretary Becerra, and just note that when I go do my town halls in Oregon, I have one in every county every year. Every single town hall this year, child care comes up. People can't find it, they can't afford it. And that's with the extra help that we have now. But that came to an end at the end of September. How important is it that we act for the child care funds that are in this emergency request?
Important enough to say that in your state of Oregon, likely more than 80,000 children will be impacted if we don't get these stabilization funds. Likely more than 3,200 of your child care providers will be impacted and may have to close if they don't have the resources to pay wages. Likely that you would receive for your state somewhere upwards of $150 million to help those child care programs.
So I think that's very helpful. Thank you. I will say that this comes up in the context not just of families who need child care, but also in the businesses that are desperate for employees and know that the major source of potential employees are home providing child care. There's not affordable child care. So it's a win-win for the family and for our businesses that need employees. Is that not the case?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary Mayorkas, I want to turn to the Family Case Management Program. I have a report from the Inspector General on the Family Case Management Program in 2017, and it noted that according to ICE, overall program compliance for all 5 regions, an average of 99% for ICE check-ins and 100% attendance at court hearings. In other words, every family that had a case manager basically turned up for their hearings. Now, my various colleagues have said we have a real concern about the long wait time, that people just disappear and don't show up for their hearings. But 99% at ICE, 100% at court hearings. What would it take to get a case management program in place so that every family going through the immigration system is part of a family case management program?
So, Senator, we have that in a pilot form through our Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. I'd be very pleased to follow up with you with respect to what resourcing would be required to expand it far more broadly.
Thank you, because I was really struck by the effectiveness of that program, and one of the first things the Trump administration did, they shut down the Family Case Management Program. And I never understood, like, if you're arguing that people disappear, why would you shut down a program that ensures 100% attendance at court hearings? But I've also been frustrated that the Biden administration hasn't restored this program over the last 3 years to cover everyone. So I'd love to see what resources that would take. Finally, I want to turn to the Flores settlement. Anadith Reyes Alvarez, the 8-year-old, died after 8 days in CBP custody. The Flores settlement said no one should be in CBP custody for more than 72 hours. I know that a lot of changes were made following her death in custody. You might recall she had the situation of sickle cell and heart condition, and family made super requests. The little girl pleaded for help, and she died and had a seizure and died. How close are we to actually honoring the Flores settlement so that no child is in CBP custody for more than 72 hours?
Senator, I'm very familiar with the tragedy of that child's passing. We did indeed take a whole series of measures immediately following that to understand how that occurred, why it occurred, and to make sure it doesn't occur again. We are in compliance with the Flores settlement. Children are indeed in our care for under 72 hours before we turn them over to our partners at the Department of Health and Human Services, and I'd be very pleased to provide you with that data as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for being here with us today. Secretary Mayorkas, you wrote an op-ed arguing that in the Washington Post that and you've repeated it today, the immigration system is broken because Congress has not acted. You did say in response to Senator Graham that the policies need to be not piecemeal or I don't know if I'm quoting you. I might have quoted one of the other senators. Not piecemeal, but comprehensive. And he said in response, that's not going to happen. We know comprehensive is not going to happen. So why is incremental change that we're trying to help you do a better job to pull down the numbers that we see? I mean, even you mentioned 2019 was an important year. Well, that was less than 1 million. Last year, 2.4 million. So even in that retrospective of a year that you're pointing to as a year that was, not emblematic of good policy, it still pales in comparison to where we are now. So give me 2 or 3 specific examples that we could do policy change that would make a difference.
Senator, I think the president on day one set forth a blueprint that
Well, pick 3 out of there that you think are the best, the most meaningful.
Senator, I would be quite hesitant to rank which ones are the best, but I continue to adhere to the approach that when we're speaking of a system that has not been reformed since 1996, that we need to reform it from top to bottom. For example, in the context of our country's economic prosperity, I hear from businesses in every state across the country about their need for labor. And we have a remarkable demand for labor. We have an international supply for labor, and yet we cannot seem to marry the two. And so in the economic context, I would say that there's a tremendous opportunity, just as there is in the asylum context.
Okay, so
and these are inextricably intertwined, and I believe that we should take an encompassing approach to a problem that is quite expansive in scope.
We are trying, I think, to offer the administration, we being the Republicans here in the Senate, offering the administration substantive policy changes that will bring these numbers down. You mentioned 1996 is when the immigration law was last changed. You've been operating under the same immigration laws that every other administration has been since 1996. The numbers, for example, in FY14 were 568,000. We probably thought that was a big number back then. You've got the same laws, and still you're 5 times more people coming in. It tells me the policies around the immigration laws that are written in 1996 are what's causing the problems. And so those are the things that we can help you with to be able to afford change. I don't think saying keeping an open border is going to help our economic situation. You've obviously testified, we don't know who a lot of these people are. So let's get to the length of the backlog. If you go to New York City, what's the average time that your case would be heard, your asylum case would be heard?
Senator, it's a individualized case analysis, but I will tell you on average, it is multiple years in too many cases, that it is the time of final adjudication of an asylum case because our case backlog is so significant across the system.
So I have a figure of 10 years. I don't know that it's exactly 10 years, but it's probably somewhere between 5 and 10. Much, much too long, and you agreed with that. So you and I know each other pretty well because I was the Chair and then Ranking Member on Homeland Security. Always trying to hire border agents has been an issue. So in the request, there's a request for another 1,000. You lost 700 last year from attrition. You're not even hired up to the amount that you can have now. How in the world are you going to hire an additional 1,000 officers when you can't even hire up to the allotted amount that you're appropriated for today?
Senator, let me first express my gratitude for your support of the Department of Homeland Security throughout the time that we have worked together. We are intensely focused on hiring reform, not just the hiring process itself, but also making advances in the polygraph process that, as you know, has been a challenge for many years. We are intensely focused on that administrative aspect of the challenge because we need additional personnel.
Thank you. I would suggest, too, more pay, better retention bonuses to be able to keep the people that you have. That's part of the package that we're putting forward here as ideas on ways to help. Thank you.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair. Thank you, Secretaries, for your willingness to testify before the committee. Just one comment on the question of border security, and this is mostly for my Republican friends, but also maybe for the secretaries. Look, I think there is one theory of the case that says once we get into an immigration and border conversation, that the sort of old John Kerry aphorism, nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to. That's not my point of view. I just wanted to lay that out there. It's not that I necessarily agree with what's being proposed by Republicans, but I do believe we should look for incremental improvements that can be executed in a 10-day or 6-week legislative time frame. And if we take Senator Graham at his word that he is trying to land a supplemental that at least to some degree hinges on a good faith effort on the border, we also have to understand that we're going to have to do this in chunks, and that in the context of an emergency security supplemental, there may be some changes. I don't know what it's going to be, and I'm not prepared to negotiate over the dais. I'm also not one of the key negotiators, but I just wanted to give you a flavor for, look, I think we're going to have to do some small things, and we can't say we can't do anything until we do everything. I just think that's not a tenable position, given the political configuration of the Congress and what we need to accomplish in the next 6 weeks. So, Secretary Mayorkas, back to my singular abiding concern, Maui. As you know, the wildfires destroyed Lahaina town and displaced about 11,000 people and destroying more than 3,000 property, the majority of which were rental housing. So the problem, first of all, FEMA's been great. FEMA has been extraordinary. And we put some money into the DERF to allow them to operate and provide resources. The problem that we have right now is timing. The burn zone is still not cleared. The EPA is doing good work with the Army Corps and others. It's going to be a year and a half total before those properties are even rebuildable. And even in an accelerated time frame, that means 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 years before these units are back up online. And that depends on individual property owners making choices that benefit some of the rental unit population. So a lot of people are going to be forced to leave Maui. I mean, that's just a fact. Should the federal government help disaster survivors stay in their communities?
Senator, I believe that the answer is yes, that we should try to do everything possible to rebuild, restore, and prove the resiliency of a community. The challenge in Maui has been quite unique because of its situation, as you well know, better than do I, as an island. And so there was initially the need to remove the hazardous material. Then, as you correctly note, there's the debris removal, which will be time-consuming because of the geographic and other challenges that the island confronts. But I do believe in devoting resources and energy to the rebuilding of a community rather than solely an exodus from it.
Okay, thank you. And we're, again, the FEMA people on the ground are excellent, but the thing that is causing me additional anxiety is that when they do their analysis, they have spreadsheets of how many people are currently being rehoused in hotels or in the long-term rental market or in the short-term rental market. And these numbers are dropping not because we are rehousing people in a more permanent situation, but because people are leaving the island. And I just wanted to flag that for you as a bad outcome. It is different than when you live on the continent and God forbid something happens to your town and you can take your FEMA money and find a place. You can put your stuff, if you have stuff remaining, and drive someplace and enter a new rental market or purchase a new home with your insurance money or with individual assistance money or whatever you were able to scrounge together. That is just not an option in West Maui, and I just wanted to flag that for you. And you and your department and FEMA have been extraordinarily flexible and responsive, but I don't want the memory of the fire itself to fade to the point where we fall back into normal bureaucratic positions and fail to recognize that Hawaii is the most isolated, heavily populated place on the planet. West Maui is even more isolated and even more expensive. And so as we think about helping these people to rebuild, it is not a matter of giving them a voucher and allowing them to fly to the mainland. And I appreciate your continued attention to this.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Secretary and Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. Secretary Mayorkas, since President Biden has been president and since you have been secretary, how many members of Hamas have come into our country across the southern border?
Senator, I'm not aware of a member of Hamas crossing the border.
Have you stopped a member of Hamas from coming in?
Senator, I am not aware of a member of Hamas being encountered at our southern border.
Have you vetted all of the people who have, all of the 8.4 million people who have come into our country illegally?
Senator, you and I have spoken about this before. As you know, we screen and vet individuals.
Have you vetted all of them?
Senator, as you know, we screen and vet individuals whom we encounter.
You haven't vetted all of them, have you?
Senator, as I said, we screen and vet individuals whom we encounter at our border.
All right, I want to move on because, with respect, Mr. Secretary, to quote a public official in my state, it takes you an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes, and you try to filibuster us and use up our time. What is a safe third country policy?
Senator, a safe third country policy is a policy that provides as follows, that when an individual is fleeing their country of origin by reason of fear of persecution, and they traverse another country that can provide them safety from that fear, then they may not qualify for humanitarian relief in their ultimate country of destination because they have...
Let me stop you because you're watching 60 Minutes again.
Well, it's Senator...
A safe third country policy, you can tell me if I misunderstand this. Safe third country policy says America has joined the UN treaty that says if you're being persecuted politically or for race or for religion in your own country, you can seek asylum in the United States. But this is the safe third country part. You have to seek that asylum in the first safe third country that you enter. Is that basically correct?
Of the safe third country policy? Are you asking me, is that a correct
Yes, I am.
assessment? Yes, but let me also
Okay,
just...
let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary. Safe third country policies have been around for over 40 years, haven't they?
I don't know,
They started in the 1980s in of all places, Scandinavia, didn't they?
I don't know, Senator.
And the UK has a safe third country policy, doesn't it?
Senator, the UK is underway in addressing its immigration
Spain
challenges.
has a safe third country policy, doesn't it?
Senator, if you know the answer to the question, I'm not sure why you're posing it to me.
Greece has a safe third country policy, doesn't it? Because I want to know if you know. You don't even know how many people are coming into our country.
That is not
Greece
true.
has a safe third country policy, doesn't it?
Senator, I disagree with the statement that you.
Understand, but does Greece have a safe third country policy?
I do not know if it does.
Canada, the EU, Turkey, Norway, they all have safe third country policies,
It's
don't
interesting. It's interesting you cite Canada because I negotiated the safe third
they?
country
Yeah,
agreement.
and the first thing that President Biden did, and you did, when you took office, was abolish our safe third country policies. Now, in 2023, this is Senator Hovind's chart. What percentage of the illegal immigrants who came across the southern border were not from Mexico? Do you know?
Senator, I know that third country nationals has been on the increase, the number of encounters.
What percentage?
I can certainly.
You don't know, do you?
I can
Okay.
certainly.
It's 71%, okay, are not people who are not from Mexico. So if we had a safe third country policy, that means that 71% of the 8.4 million people that if you have allowed to come into our country illegally, let me be conservative and use 6.6 million because the 8.4 includes gotaways. 71% of the 6.6 million people that you have allowed into our country illegally would not be hurt in any way. They could claim asylum from political or religious or racial persecution, but they would have to do it in another country, more than likely Mexico. Is that not the case?
Senator, that is an incomplete and inaccurate accounting of the safe third country.
And did you not say, when we last spoke, and I proposed that, you thought it was a bad policy?
Senator, let me share with you a prerequisite to a safe third country agreement, and that is.
No, I'm almost out of time, and I'm not going to let you filibuster, Mr. Secretary.
Well, Senator, I have to say that 60 minutes.
Well, I'm just not going to let you do
Senator
it.
Kennedy, if he can respond, you are out of time, but I'd like to.
It's my time, Madam Chair, and I'm going to use it the way I want.
Your time is expired.
Well, you let others go on. Here's what I think, Mr. Secretary. I think you're a smart guy. Now, there are only one or two things going on here. Either you're not qualified to manage a Costco food court, or you believe in open borders. And I think it's the latter.
Senator Kennedy, your time has expired. Thank you.
I would just say the following two things. Number one, you're 0 for 2 on that. You're inaccurate in both respects, number one. And I'd like the record to reflect that 60 minutes is not 45 minutes, because I can't seem to answer a question without being interrupted. I just wanted to make that comment.
Well, if you would answer a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the recognition. Thank you for being here to both of you. That's the first time that I've heard a 4-second interrupted answer be described as a filibuster. I mean, I think the most important part of these hearings is hearing the answers from our witnesses. I don't know that it serves this committee very well to give you literally 3 seconds to answer very complicated questions before asking the next one. And so I'm going to ask you a question, Secretary Mayorkas, and I'm going to give you the time to answer it. I think that you get a lot of criticism for implementing the law. It's been 40 years since we've come to a bipartisan agreement on how to change the law. We have tried many times to engage in that process, most recently in 2013 when we came to a conclusion in the Senate, but Republicans in the House of Representatives refused to take up our measure. This could all be a lot easier if we would decide together to come together and fix part of this problem, half of this problem, all of this problem. But most of the complaints here are because these laws haven't been updated in 40 years, and this administration and every administration has been stuck with a mess caused by congressional inaction. And so this is a little bit of transference, as they say in the discipline of psychology. So you've asked for $755 million for USCIS in this budget. Typically, when we have been trying to push for money for this account in prior years, and I know this as chairman of this subcommittee that oversees the Department of Homeland Security, it's been Republicans who have pushed back. But tell us the consequences of underfunding USCIS at the level that it is underfunded today. Tell us how your hands are tied to try to efficiently manage the border if you don't have the resources you need to properly do all of the functions that USCIS is engaged in at the border and throughout our legal immigration system. Why is this really important, and why is it important for Republicans and Democrats to come together to support that funding?
Senator, thank you for your inquiry. When we have more asylum officers and when we have more support personnel to assist them in accomplishing the mission that they are expert in performing, then what we are able to do is drive greater efficiency in the asylum system, including shortening the time in between the time of the credible fear interview and the ultimate adjudication, including in between the time of initial encounter and the credible fear interview. We can conduct more credible fear interviews and we can advance the system because we have discussed already in this hearing the unacceptable fact that it is far too slow a process, the asylum adjudication process. That is because the system is broken, and critically, we are terribly underfunded and under-resourced, and this supplemental gets to that latter point.
One of the things my Republican colleagues have talked about in this hearing is adjustments to the asylum standard, and I think that's a legitimate conversation to have, but that will necessitate, to the extent that there is more or different work being done by USCIS, some pretty significant new resources. And so I just put that on the table for my Republican colleagues who are coming to the table in good faith for a conversation about changing the laws. Last question, Secretary Mayorkas, just to talk for a minute about the not-for-profit security grant program. I know how much you believe in this. I know that you have been very vocal about the incredible increase in anti-Semitic rhetoric and violence, as well as threats of violence against our Muslim communities. This program is badly underfunded compared to the amount of need. Talk to us about the gap that exists right now between the amount of money that's in that account and the amount of demand, in particular from synagogues, Jewish community centers, and mosques to upgrade their security.
Senator, very, very quickly. The rise in anti-Semitism, the latest data point I saw is that it has increased 388% since October 7th. The nonprofit security grant program is tremendously oversubscribed. The demand for these funds from large and small institutions of all faiths far exceeds the amount of funding that we have. And it is critical funding that enables faith-based institutions and other nonprofit organizations to secure their facilities, its places of worship, its religious schools, and the like, whether it's personnel, cameras, gating, whatever the needs are in a particular jurisdiction. The demand is extraordinary in all sized institutions.
Thank you. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you both for being here. Secretary Mayorkas, last week we heard from Secretaries Blinken and Austin about their requests for emergency supplemental funding. And we are really trying to work hard to ensure that the funding they are requesting will actually help rebuild our own defense industrial base and support the protection of our allies and partners who are currently at war. And I have a really easy question, and it will take less than 5 seconds for you to answer this. Given the large amount of disaster supplemental funding that has been requested for DHS, is it fair to call the situation at the border a disaster? And this is yes or no that should take just 1 or 2 seconds.
No, the disaster is the fact that we have a broken immigration system that we can't seem to fix.
So the situation at the border, you're saying, is not a disaster?
That is correct.
Okay, and of the 240,000 people who received parole in FY23, how many people from China, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela are denied parole? How many of those were denied parole?
If I may, Senator, the parole program is for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, not individuals from the People's Republic of China. And I would be pleased to provide you with that data, the success and failure rate of applicants for that program. I'd be pleased to provide that with you subsequent to this hearing.
So it's not a blanket?
It is not. It's an individualized application where the supporter, the sponsor, if you will, is vetted and screened, as well as the intended or potential parolee.
And what factors do not meet the threshold for receiving parole?
Oh, for example, if someone presents a public safety threat, if someone presents a national security threat, we would not grant them parole. Those are two very easy examples to cite. We screen and vet because our highest priority is the safety and security of the American people.
Okay, I have a little time left, and of all the discussion, it is clear that the current border policies this administration has in place are failing terribly. You yourself last week said that there is a need for policy changes, and yet the funding requested in this supplemental will do little to secure our border, and instead, it will throw money at sanctuary cities and inflate our asylum problems even further. What this administration has is a policy problem, or perhaps more appropriately, an implementation of the law problem, not a funding problem. Please explain why Congress should provide you with billions more so-called border security funding if you're just going to keep the same failed policies in place.
Senator, I respectfully disagree with the factual premise of your question. I do not think it is a failure of policy. It is the failure of a broken immigration system. It is also the product of an under-resourced, perennially under-resourced department. This supplemental will assist us in further securing the border by adding critically needed additional personnel and technology. And I will share with you that what we are experiencing is an unprecedented level of global migration, and that is also gripping the entire hemisphere.
Yeah, I think we all know that. I have another question here for Secretary Becerra. Staying on the topic of immigration, Mr. Secretary, your department's Office of Refugee Resettlement is acting in defiance of the Hyde Amendment by using taxpayer dollars to transport pregnant, unaccompanied alien girls across state lines to obtain abortion, clearly acting to circumvent pro-life state laws. Secretary Becerra, how many abortions for pregnant migrant girls has the Office of Refugee Resettlement illegally facilitated across state lines over the past year, and what was that cost to taxpayers?
Senator, thank you for the question. I want to assure you that at the Department of Health and Human Services, we comply with the law when it comes to providing health services or making sure Americans have access to the services. We make sure that we follow the laws that have been passed by Congress, including the Hyde Amendment. And so the services that we provide to those individuals who are within our care through the unaccompanied child program, they will receive health care services, but it's all within compliance within the law.
Okay, if you wish to disagree with me on the legal aspect, let me put it this way. How many abortions for pregnant migrant girls has the Office of Refugee Resettlement facilitated across state lines over the past year, and what was that cost to taxpayers?
So, Senator, we make sure in compliance with the law that if, for example, emergency services are needed for an individual in our care, we would make sure that they provide those services. We also want to make sure that we assist any individual in being able to execute on their rights to have health care services. So
Do you know the numbers?
I can try to get back to you on any precise numbers.
Okay, that's what I'm asking for, is just how much did it cost the taxpayers and how many were there? And my
Thank you.
time is out.
Your time is up. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, included in the supplemental funding request is over $2.5 billion for immigrations and customs enforcement. And I've had longstanding concerns about the conditions at the Torrance County Detention Facility, where in 2022, the Department of Homeland Security's OIG actually recommended immediately relocating all of the ICE detainees from Torrance until the facility ensures adequate staffing and safe living conditions. A later subsequent DHS OIG report reaffirmed the same sort of basket of problems. And so what I want to ask, I have a very simple request for you. I want you to become personally familiar with this facilities and its challenges. Will you commit to doing that?
I will, and I should say two things.
Go ahead.
One, the conditions in ICE detention facilities is indeed a priority, and for the first time, we closed 5 facilities that did not comply with the conditions that we insist upon. I commit to you to look at the Torrance facility, Senator.
I look forward to working with you on that. Secretary Mayorkas, I also want to ask you to we've sort of glossed over what you said about the importance of technology at our land-based ports of entry. So I want you to expand on the technological investments that are incorporated into this supplemental and why they're so important, in particular, to detect illicit narcotics like fentanyl. And please reiterate why it's also so important to focus specifically, because of the numbers, on those land-based ports of entry.
Senator, over 90% of the fentanyl that is smuggled into this country is smuggled in through the ports of entry, predominantly via passenger and commercial vehicles. And non-intrusive inspection technology, it's known as, everything is, it seems, in the government by its acronym NII, is a remarkably efficient force multiplier in enabling us to detect the ingenious ways that fentanyl is sought to be smuggled through those vehicles. Most recently, I saw lengthy vertical candles hollowed out in their centers and pills hidden in them. The detection technology that we seek to enhance through this supplemental, I believe it's about $1.1 billion. It's just an extraordinary tool in detecting that and enabling our field office personnel, our field operations personnel, to work on other elements of the port security.
That $1.1 billion, how much additional capacity to scan incoming passenger vehicles will that give you?
I should, if I can, correct myself. I think it's about $850 million on the technology. We also have some of the funds, the balance for the officers themselves. I'm sorry, if you
just how much additional capacity will that give at our ports of entry to catch illicit substances?
Oh, it's by a multiple, Senator. It's just an extraordinary advancement of our mission.
Secretary Becerra, I want to ask you about the scheduling process. And under the Controlled Substances Act, both HHS and the Drug Enforcement Agency have a role to play in scheduling. Can you talk a little bit about the unique expertise that HHS brings to that process that may not exist at DEA?
Senator, thanks for the question. Principally through the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA at HHS, it is our responsibility to try to give the science on substances so that, therefore, DEA can then decide where to classify that substance when it comes to being a narcotic or a substance that could have an impact on society. We undertake an effort to make sure that we update the science. We want to make sure that if we're scheduling a particular substance or drug, it's properly scheduled. And so whether it is all the fentanyl and what we're seeing today with some of these drugs that are having an impact on our country, we want to make sure that they are properly, based on the science, schedule for activity. We also want to, for example, make sure that we can do the research that's necessary to determine how to schedule a drug.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing today. Gentlemen, welcome. Secretary Mayorkas, I'm going to turn my first question to you. I'm having my staff pass around page 51 from the August budget proposal that you put forward in the supplemental request. What I'd like to do is draw your attention to the language that's highlighted there in yellow. This is a breathtaking proposal that basically requests the authority for DHS to reprogram any amounts, all existing past, present, and future amounts of ICE funding, the ability to redirect that funding in its entirety, if that were your decision, to non-law enforcement activities. There's a litany of them listed there, including to non-governmental organizations. In essence, it would allow you to defund ICE to some extent, maybe to its entirety, and place those funds to other purposes. I looked for this same request in your October budget proposal, and I didn't find it. So, Mr. Secretary, are you still requesting this?
Senator, I have never proposed the defunding of ICE. I would vigorously...
Secretary, that's the exact... Please read this language that I handed to you here.
Senator, I would vigorously oppose the defunding of ICE, and please recall that I served for 12 years as a federal prosecutor, and I believe devoutly in the law enforcement mission of that agency.
I'm not asking you about your resume, Mr. Secretary. I'm asking you about the language that's plainly here in the page. This language asks for the authority, that we grant you the authority, DHS, the authority to reprogram the funds that are intended for law enforcement at ICE, the authority to reprogram to the variety of things like non-governmental organizations, which are clearly not law enforcement. I mean, are you denying this would allow you the ability to reprogram even $1?
Oh, let me be clear, Senator, because it's I would want to read this carefully and in the context.
Well, I would hope you would have read it, because you're talking about an $8 billion budget here, and you're here to defend this budget right now.
Senator, let me be clear that there are different types of detention that work for different individuals to ensure their appearance in the immigration enforcement proceedings in which we place them. For example, there are individuals who pose a threat to public safety that need to be detained in a full custodial setting. There are individuals who do not pose a public safety threat, as to whom we have some level of assurance of their continued appearance in enforcement proceedings, and therefore we place them on alternatives to detention. There very well may be individuals that will continue to appear in their immigration enforcement proceedings if they are in a community-based residential center.
Well, here's what this proposal, though, specifically asks about the budget for the only law enforcement agency that we have that is charged with the deportation of people that have come to this country illegally, many of them with criminal records. And what this asks for is the authority to reprogram that budget, to defund ICE and take those funds and use them for a variety of things, including giving them to non-governmental organizations. What it asks for, in essence, the way I read this, is to give ICE a different purpose. You have the ability to reprogram ICE and turn it into a travel agency that brings illegal immigrants here and sends them to hotels in New York City. You're going to turn this into an electromagnet if we were to allow you this authority.
That is completely false.
Then why is it requested in this manner, Mr. Secretary? Can you look at the language here and tell me that's not what you're requesting?
Senator, is it your assertion that when we contract out to an organization outside of the government to deliver greater efficiency?
My assertion is that you are asking for the ability to redirect, or reprogram is the technical term you use, to reprogram ICE funding to those sorts of purposes. That is a defunding of law enforcement. And placing those law enforcement funds, which we desperately need law enforcement,
Senator,
and putting them into custodial services or anything that might make it more convenient or more attractive to come to this country illegally.
Senator, so your assertion is that when we contract out, we are defunding the organization?
No, and I'd like to reclaim my time because I'm running out of it. This is not an assertion. This is a plain reading of the language here. You're asking for breathtaking authority to reprogram to defund ICE That is incorrect. You're not backing away from this request. I'm not talking about the custodial services. I'm talking about your request to defund ICE up to the entirety of their budget. And I'm going to do everything I can to stop that from happening here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to consider these important supplemental requests. And I do hope, Mr. Secretary, that you give a prompt and fulsome answer to the questions presented by Senator Hagerty. It's my understanding this is not included in the current supplemental. I respect that you're being careful in not saying that, but that's what my staff are telling me. I've long followed a simple statement from President Biden back when he was senator. Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll show you your values. And these words ring particularly true for me as I'm looking at this broad supplemental request. Back in 2018, a bipartisan group of us that includes many on this committee introduced legislation that Senator Rounds and King carried. It was transformative. It would have paired the DREAM Act with what was then considered an eye-popping amount of $25 billion invested in border security over 10 years, $2.5 billion a year. This supplemental requests $13.6 billion additional for securing our border and for dealing with our broken immigration system for 1 year. It is a dramatic investment. Money matters. Your request would include hiring thousands of new Border Patrol agents, ICE prosecutors, USCIS officers, Customs and Border Patrol, immigration judges, and those who process claims for asylum. The non-intrusive inspection systems that we would use to interdict fentanyl crossing at the border ports of entry. All of this matters, and I urge my colleagues to pay attention to the positive benefits for border security that would result from taking seriously and passing this supplemental. Mr. Secretary, DHS has requested authorization for a policy change in this supplemental as well, a change to allow electronic service of notices to appear. Could you help explain briefly what that would mean to be able to provide electronic service of process and why it would help DHS enforce the law?
Senator, thank you. The electronic issuance of notice to appear gains tremendous efficiency. We're using technology to be able to provide a critical immigration enforcement document to an individual whose address we have confirmed, and therefore we do not need to send an officer to that location to provide that same service.
Those of us who've been involved in law enforcement or who are attorneys understand that individual service of process by hand, by paper, is far less efficient than this authority that you are requesting in the supplemental. Using technology to ensure you're able to charge everyone apprehended by Border Patrol while also helping migrants better understand and access and receive vital case management information is exactly the sort of pragmatic compromise to strengthen our security that we should adopt on a bipartisan basis. Some of my colleagues, Mr. Secretary, have urged that we adopt again the Remain in Mexico program, not just reinstate it, but expand it to include every apprehended migrant who cannot be detained. Based on your experience with the program and your reasons for terminating it, rooted in administrative burdens and individual safety and diplomatic challenges, can you speak briefly to the practicalities of resuming that program?
Senator, you correctly cited three failings of that proposal. Number one are the administrative burdens, given the need for due process. Two are the humanitarian considerations with respect to the conditions in which those individuals are placed during the pendency of the immigration enforcement proceeding. And three are the diplomatic challenges, because, of course, Mexico is a sovereign nation and would require its consent to that implementation.
One of the criticisms I've heard directly from several of my colleagues on this committee today is that the President's border supplemental funding request is only about managing the border, not securing the border. Respectfully, I think that distinction is false, and I think this request includes significant investments in things like non-intrusive inspection at the border ports of entry that would improve securing our border. A significant amount of this funding would go to rapidly adjudicating claims for asylum. Can you explain how swift adjudication of claims is indeed a part and parcel of more effective border enforcement.
Senator, when an individual's claim fails under the law and we effect their removal swiftly, that swift removal serves a significant deterrent effect. And with respect to the false assertion that this is just managing the border as opposed to securing the border, I would cite for a perfect example our request for additional funds for removal flights for individuals as to whom we have determined their claim is invalid, and we seek their prompt removal to their country of origin. That is an enforcement measure.
Well, thank you. We have a lot of work ahead of us to negotiate and navigate the challenges of the supplemental requests. I'll conclude with 2 quick points. There are 14 senators, including many on this committee, co-leading an Afghan Adjustment Act. It is my hope that 2 years on, we will finally do right by those who served alongside us in Afghanistan. And I could not agree more with the chair's opening comment that we should not have an Israel-only supplemental jammed through. In the next couple of weeks, we should consider all of the issues raised in today's hearing for supplemental funding. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rubio.
Secretary Mayorkas, under our current laws, I know I'm correct on this, if you endorse or you espouse terrorist views and you apply for a visa, that's denied. You're inadmissible, right?
I believe that's the correct language.
So what if you already have a visa, and then while in the U.S. with that visa, you espouse or support terrorist activity? Shouldn't that be an automatic cancellation of that visa?
Senator, I would have to check the law, but I would understand that it might be a basis for the revocation of the visa and the removal of the individual. I'd want to check the law in that area.
Well, I think it makes sense that if you can't get a visa because you espouse terrorist views or endorse terrorist views, if you have a visa and then you do that while a visitor, we're talking about visitors to the United States, that visa should be canceled.
I would agree.
Okay, good, because I'm asking the administration to enforce that, and I hope you will. I think that's important. Let me get, and there's a lot of talk about immigration. I deal with immigration every day because, as you know, where I live in Miami, virtually everyone's from somewhere else, whether it's another state or primarily another country in South Florida. So everywhere I go, I'm just going to get real about what people tell me. This is what they tell me. I talked to a lady 3 days ago. She says her son, I forgot the exact, he may be in Honduras. She's going to Venmo him $5,000, $6,000 or Cash App. He's going to pay someone to bring him to the U.S. border where he will present himself to border officials. He will be admitted into the country at some point, released. He knows this because other people have done it. Depending on how he's released, within 180 days, I believe, he'll have a work permit. And at some point in the future, he'll have to show up for a hearing, maybe not get an immediate trial date, but he's basically within the next 8 weeks is going to be living in the United States. This is the pattern that they have established and that they understand. And once he's successful at doing that, he'll obviously tell people back home how he did it, and they'll do the same thing. Is that not, in essence, what is happening?
I would perhaps, Senator, qualify a few of the facts, but that is indeed a pattern that we see, which speaks to how broken our immigration system is, but how important are the policies that we have promulgated to prevent that scenario from occurring. And let me give you an example of the policy that we have promulgated to ensure that that scenario does not occur. What we have done is we have promulgated a regulation that provides, it's called the circumvention of lawful pathways. Our model is to build safe, orderly, and lawful pathways to come to the United States and seek relief under our laws, and to deliver a consequence for those individuals who do not avail themselves of those lawful pathways, but instead follow the pattern that you have described.
But as of right now, the pattern I've described is the prevalent one.
That is one pattern, but the policy that we have promulgated, the model that we have architected, is in fact a significant defense against that in the context of a broken immigration system, and our policy is working, although it is under challenge in the courts. Our circumvention of lawful pathways regulation is being challenged in one court, and our lawful pathways are being challenged. And so we get hit from both sides, but the model is an optimal model that we are continuing to pursue during.
I understand. I don't mean to cut you off. I got your point. I only have a minute left. I want to get to one more question. My point on that, though, is the perception is as important as the reality. The perception right now still is. I mean, this lady told me this on Monday, so this is, I'm not, I guess I can tell you that's at least one person more that's coming. I want to talk, and Secretary Becerra, maybe this will involve you a little bit too, about a specific category, this refugee resettlement, Cubans, Haitians. But let me just focus on the Cuban one because I know that one well. So if you come from Cuba, you are presumed to be fleeing political persecution. So you automatically are eligible for refugee cash. You're eligible for food stamps. You're eligible for Medicaid. Others who immigrate to this country have to wait 5 years for those and don't get the refugee cash. But within a year, depending if you're paroled, you can apply for a green card. And then you can travel back to Cuba as often as you want, multiple times. You can take cash. You can buy stuff with the food stamps. I've seen it. Okay, this is not, I didn't read this in a magazine. I've seen it. They use the food stamps, they fill up these bags, and they take it back to Cuba over there, or they just transfer cash back. Some people go back to Cuba for 3 months at a time. They've been here a year. How, if you are fleeing persecution, how can it be that a year later you are spending summers in Cuba? How can it be that less than a year later you're traveling back 6, 8 times a year to Cuba? I've never heard of people fleeing persecution going back to a place repeatedly. There's an issue here, is there not?
Senator, you respectfully allow me to say that you've misdescribed the Cuban Adjustment Act and what happens when an individual from Cuba arrives in the United States, because we do indeed remove individuals to Cuba. So,
assuming Cuba will accept them and they're ineligible for some reason, right?
That is correct.
But the overwhelming majority do not get removed.
That is.
Which is fine. I'm just saying, if once you, I'm not talking about the people that are here. Once you are here, you're assumed here because you're a refugee fleeing persecution, and you have a host of benefits at a minimum. If a year later you're here on a refugee, but you're going back to Cuba 6 times, shouldn't you at least lose the refugee status?
Senator, let me follow up with your concern. The question being, if I understand it correctly, is if indeed an individual flees the country of origin by reason of fear of persecution, they obtain refugee status because
specifically Cuban in this case.
Because that fear has been affirmed and they are now a refugee. Does their desire and actually travel to the country of origin militate against the legitimacy of their claim?
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
I will follow up on that, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Mayorkas, failure to stem the flow of fentanyl at the southwest border has absolutely tragic consequences, as you know, for families across the country, and including in my state of Wisconsin. Last year, more than 1,400 Wisconsinites died from overdoses. And between 2019 and 2021, fentanyl overdose deaths in Wisconsin grew by 97%. That's why in October, I called on President Biden to prioritize additional resources to strengthen security at the southwest border to stop the flow of illicit drugs like fentanyl. And I'm glad that the administration listened and is seeking $1.2 billion for the Department of Homeland Security for inspection systems and additional CBP officers. The administration's supplemental request includes funding for urgent needs, and Congress really must act on this supplemental request in full. An all-hands-on-deck approach to addressing fentanyl trafficking requires commitments from international partners as well as local law enforcement. So I particularly want you to drill down on that. How is DHS working with law enforcement partners to both stop the initial flow of fentanyl into our country and then prevent its distribution within our borders? And how will that work be strengthened with the funding in this supplemental request?
Thank you very much, Senator. You're absolutely right that it requires an all-hands-on-deck approach, and it is something that we have to work with our international partners to address, and we are indeed doing so. And let me cite just one example that is illustrative of the advances that we have made. Homeland Security Investigations, the premier law enforcement investigative agency within the Department of Homeland Security, housed at Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has transnational criminal investigative units, TCIUs, that work very closely with our law enforcement partners to the south, in Mexico, in the Central American countries, to address the production of fentanyl, to address the trafficking in the precursor chemicals, the movement of equipment, the movement of monies, all aspects of the transnational criminal organizations, so that we dismantle and disrupt them. That's a perfect example of the international partnerships that we have advanced over the last 3 years.
Thank you. Secretary Becerra, we've heard a lot today, as you know, about the child care crisis and the consequences of inaction. But the expiration of the child care stabilization funding is not just a theoretical problem in Wisconsin. Earlier this week, the Washington Post reported on the ripple effect when a child care provider in a small town like Milton, Wisconsin, had to close their doors as the stabilization funding came to an end. The closure meant that a mom with 2 young children and a baby on the way could no longer afford or find child care that worked for her family. So she decided to leave her full-time job, which now means that the dental practice where she worked is down 1 dental assistant and can only serve a fraction of the patients that they used to. So child care is not just a problem for working moms, although that ought to be reason enough to address it. It is also, as this Wisconsin example shows, a problem for everyone that has significant ripple effects. Secretary, are we seeing similar effects in other states as the stabilization program ends? And how will the additional funding through this supplemental proposal reverse this trend?
Senator, you're absolutely right. This is happening throughout the country. I have a particular case here I can cite to you from the state of Maine. Jordan Rosagwal had a child care program in the state of Maine. She was able to keep it afloat because of the stabilization funds that she received. Once she saw the end in sight, she started to make calculations. She realized she would not be able to make payroll, and she made the decision, unfortunately, to close down her center. The impact left some 100 children and their parents, and these are parents, in many cases, who are professionals, without child care. This is a story we're going to hear over and over again because the stabilization funds acted immediately to do exactly that, stabilize many child care centers.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Collins, for holding this hearing today. I thank you for joining us today, to Secretary Mayorkas and Secretary Becerra. As I said last week, there is a national security crisis at our southern border. FY 2023 set a record of total encounters, almost 2.5 million. This September set a new monthly record for encounters along the southwest border, nearly 270,000. The Biden administration also sets a new record of encounters of individuals on the terrorist watch list between ports of entry, 169 total arrests on the southern border. That is more than the previous 3 fiscal years combined. Secretary Mayorkas, that is not a record to be proud of. President Biden's national security supplemental request included $13.6 billion for the border and migration, including nearly $9 billion for DHS, with very few details of how DHS intends to spend that funding. Money alone is not going to solve this crisis. That's clear. We must make policy changes to that. And I appreciate some colleagues on the other side of the aisle who recognize that that can be done incrementally. Whether it's tightening our asylum standards or limiting the use of parole to case-by-case basis, policies must be enacted to stem the flow of migration to our southern border. We've come to this hearing today to address emergencies. Natural disasters are emergencies. Our southern border is an emergency. Helping our friends defend themselves against brutal attacks, that's an emergency. But the latest supplemental request really stretches the definition of what an emergency is. For example, I agree that the child care shortage is a crisis and that thoughtful and sustained attention is necessary. However, we need to be honest with the American people. We have to differentiate between emergency spending and long-term investment in our national priorities. The Child Care Development Block Grant is a bipartisan program with a storied history that should be supported and it should be improved. ARPA created the Child Care Stabilization Fund to instead support a new program that had a firm expiration date of September 30th, 2023. The program in ARPA was created through a partisan reconciliation package to address what we were told was the immediate child care emergency caused by COVID and prolonged lockdowns. COVID emergency funding was never intended to be indefinite. This committee knew it would expire. This Congress knew it would expire. The Biden administration knew it would expire. And Mr. Secretary, you knew it would expire. Knowing that it was set to expire in September of 2023, in your FY24 budget request, you requested $9 billion for the Child Care Block Grant Program. But now, just a few months later, you're here and you're highlighting a completely manufactured cliff, asking for $16 billion to supplement regular order appropriations. That's not how to effectively run a government, and it's a concerning trend throughout this request. As a government, we cannot continue to bolster certain priorities through unsustainable and really unreliable year-end emergency supplementals, instead of addressing priorities through regular order and budgeting. So, Secretary Becerra, you state that if Congress does not provide additional funding for the COVID Emergency Child Care Fund, working families across the country are going to suffer the consequences, with higher out-of-pocket costs, fewer options for care, more women leaving the workforce. And none of us up here want that. Not one person up here wants to see that happen. But my question to you is this. Do you believe that throwing in a request for $16 billion for an expired program into an end-of-the-year emergency supplemental request is an effective way to address one of the most pressing issues facing families? Why didn't you address it in the budget request? You know, I joined this committee, and I thank the chairwoman, I thank the ranking member for following regular order. You know, we went through hearings, we went through markups, but to me, this is going around the appropriations process, and I am upset by that. I think for a government to run and for families and businesses to have certainty in their lives, we need to identify those priorities, be honest about them, and do it in regular order. And, sir, I don't believe this is.
Madam Chair, I know time has expired, but
If you have 20 seconds, 30 seconds for
Certainly.
response.
Senator, I hope you will work. I know the chairwoman has been trying to work to increase the funding for childcare through the Child Care and Development Fund. But as you know, that only goes to certain families who qualify. And even then, that money only accounts for about 1 in 7 of the eligible families who need childcare. The stabilization money was meant to actually help providers, not necessarily directly the families, because providers were going under. I hope you agree that it is an emergency if a child care center that millions of American families depend on if they go under, it is an emergency. It will be a crisis.
Thank you. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Becerra, good to see you. I've enjoyed our time serving together in the House years back. It's good to see you here before us today. I also want to thank you for your focus on affordable child care, despite whatever the policy procedures are. It is a crisis. It is a major issue that we need to focus on. In fact, a September report from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce estimates that my state of Michigan alone loses nearly $3 billion a year when working parents struggle to find childcare. That's very real, a loss of $3 billion in my state. It means about $576 million in lost tax revenue and another $2.3 billion loss for Michigan employers because of high employee turnover and absenteeism. This is something that we must be focused on all the time. And as you cited in your testimony, the President's Council of Economic Advisors report released this week found that the stabilization grants in the American Rescue Plan had a cost-benefit ratio of about 2 to 1. Now, I spent a lot of years in the investment business prior to being in elected office. And if I told investors you get a 2 to 1 return on your investment, most people would grab that. This is a significant investment in the future of our country. And perhaps you could just expand briefly as to, once again, why this is an investment in our country and in our economy, and to actually be penny wise is truly being pound foolish.
Senator, thank you. Every dollar we put into the stabilization fund for child care makes sure that a family can go to work and still know that the child will be taken care of. And by the way, I should emphasize that principally means a woman can go to work, because more often than not, it will be the woman who has to sacrifice the job to stay home to care for the child. It means that we will see more small businesses stay in business, because it is small business that is the driving force in the child care sector. And it means that several million children will continue to have quality child care. In your state of Michigan, without these stabilization funds that the President is requesting, some 250,000 children likely will lose the child care that they have.
Yeah, and that's unacceptable. So thank you for that response. Secretary Mayorkas, good to see you here in another context. I see you usually at my committee. It's good to see you here today. My question is, with the conflict between Israel and Hamas, Jewish, Muslim, and Arab American communities are experiencing escalating rates of violence, hate, and harassment. It's something we addressed last week in our committee. And as you know, your department's nonprofit security grant program, which I worked to reauthorize last Congress with Congressman Thompson and Senator Portman, it provides absolutely invaluable resources to protect houses of worship and nonprofits from these acts of hate. My question for you, Secretary, is if provided with supplemental funding for this program, how will the department plan to expedite the grant process to ensure that funding gets into the hands of these applicants more quickly than the months or longer that it's currently taking? This is an immediate threat that needs immediate action.
Senator, thank you very much for being such a champion of the program and advocating for the increase in funding to date. The $200 million we seek in this supplemental is more needed now than ever before. We have been, in fact, working within the department to ensure that if and hopefully when we are provided this critically needed supplemental funding to that nonprofit security grant program, we get it in the hands of applicants very quickly, and we are looking at how we can really gain efficiencies in the application process to achieve that outcome.
Well, good. This year has also been, as you well know, another record-breaking year for natural disasters. 24 events occurring so far. That's cost over $1 billion. After almost running out of money over the summer, FEMA's disaster relief fund currently contains over $30 billion, thanks to Congress fulfilling the administration's previous supplemental request and passing a continuing resolution. However, we know that rebuilding has just begun for many costly disasters. So my question for you, Secretary Mayorkas, is without the additional $9 billion requested by the administration last month, when do you project the disaster relief fund to go into deficit?
Senator, I believe I was just conferred with FEMA about this. Mid-year or later of 24, we would have to begin to compromise the distribution of funds to only life-saving activities as opposed to community rebuilding and restoration and other critical elements of our work. I believe that's the correct time frame. I will circle back with you to confirm the accuracy of what I just represented.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Madam Chairman, thank you. And to the ranking member, secretaries, thank you for being here today. It was just last week we were debating the aspects of the emergency supplemental related to national security, support for Ukraine, support for Israel. I think today's conversation is equally important, and that is a focus on our borders here within the United States and a recognition that when there is unrest and war abroad, we are never safe on our own territory, and to assume that we are so is naive and ill-informed, ill-placed. So I appreciate the discussion that we're having today. Secretary Mayorkas, I heard you say multiple times here this morning that comprehensive reform is needed. I think we would all agree that comprehensive reform is needed. But I am appreciative of Senator Schott's comment with a recognition that we need to make some incremental gains here. We have got to do more to demonstrate to the people in this country that our borders are safe, that our borders are secure. And, Mr. Secretary, you cannot close your eyes to that chart that just shows the numbers increasing and increasing and increasing. We recognize that there are pressures globally that are putting pressures on us. But the people of this country are not feeling secure. They are not feeling secure about our own borders. And so as we work within the parameters of what I think is a very important emergency supplemental, Ukraine, Israel, support in the Indo-Pacific, support for the border, meaningful support for the border, recognize that this side of the dais is not just talking to hear themselves talk. We need to see some reforms that just putting more money to a broken system doesn't give people the confidence that they need. And I'm with you. We need to have more men and women on the border. We need to have more technologies. But we also need to be able to look critically at some of the policies that we have in place and admit that they're just not working right now. And so I hope you take that to heart. I hope our colleagues here realize that this is not an us versus them. This is people in this country, whether you are in Washington or Maine or Alaska or Maryland, who are not feeling secure right now. We are a long ways from the southern border. But I will tell you that looking at the numbers that we see coming across our northern border and the number of those on the terrorist watch list, what we're seeing on the northern borders are 2 and 3 times more. Almost 500 individuals on the terrorist watch list attempted to enter the U.S. at northern border points of entry. I appreciate what you shared with Senator Shaheen from North Dakota. You said that you didn't have the ability to disaggregate by states, but you did by region. I would suggest to you that Alaska, that part connected to Washington through Canada, that is a region where we ought to be able to get that information. We haven't been able to get it yet, and I would ask for your help in identifying that so that we can be better informed there. I want to bring it home to the people that I represent in Alaska, who, yes, are looking at our northern border, but even more alarming than who may be coming across our northern border is what we are seeing coming into our state with regards to fentanyl. And I'm participating in a hearing this afternoon in the Indian Affairs Committee on fentanyl in Indian country. And in my state, we are looking at a situation right now where our smallest of small native villages are receiving amounts of fentanyl that are breathtaking in their scope. 98 pounds of fentanyl, excuse me, I underestimated, nearly 130 pounds of fentanyl in the last 15 months coming into Alaska, into communities as small as Savunga and Tyonek. One shipment alone included 1,877 grams of fentanyl to Savunga. This is a community of 826 people on St. Lawrence Island in the middle of the Bering Straits. Another shipment in March, 1,593 grams of fentanyl bound for Tyonek, population 415, not accessible by road, by boat. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate what you are sending to IHS through this supplemental. It's $250 million. We got to look really critically at what is happening to our Native American, Alaska Native population with fentanyl. My time has expired. I haven't allowed for response, but I hope you take seriously that we will not be able to get the support that we need for Israel, for Ukraine, for the Indo-Pacific, for the disasters, unless there is true, meaningful border security as part of this supplemental. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank both of you for your service and your testimony. Secretary Becerra, great to see you again. It's great to serve with you in the House. And this is just by way of thanking you and the President for the requests you put forward on child care. In the state of Maryland, child care is more expensive than in-state tuition at the University of Maryland. And that obviously puts an incredible strain on family budgets. And it obviously reduces, as you've testified today, the ability of people to enter the workforce if they're having to pay more in childcare in some instances than they're making, or certainly not making all of that work together. So the request that the President has made will help 5,900 providers in the state of Maryland and serve approximately 172,000 children. This is a really important part of the President's request. Secretary Mayorkas, I know we've covered a lot of territory, so just a couple things as well to thank you to begin with. H-2B visas, thank you for using your authority to expand those numbers. It's especially welcome in Maryland with respect to our seafood processors who simply cannot function without H-2B visa workers, and of course that hurts our entire economy as well. And I know Senator Murkowski and I have been working on this for a long time to actually get a seafood carve-out, but we appreciate your efforts in this regard. You and I have talked about it many times. I also want to salute your involvement in the White House Worker Protection Task Force, which is critical to establishing comprehensive safeguards for American and foreign workers. My colleagues have mentioned it, but the nonprofit security grant program was already essential, more important now than ever, with respect to the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim attacks, and we need those funds to make sure that we provide the security to protect people against hate crimes in all their ugly forms. And that is included in your budget, right?
Yes, it is, Senator.
I also want to thank you for dispelling the myth that we hear all the time that fentanyl is crossing the border through illegal points of entry as opposed to through points of entry, coming in on trucks and other vehicles. and you have funding in this budget to improve the screening so that we can find and confiscate fentanyl when it crosses our border. Is that right?
Yes, it is, Senator.
Now, I would like to ask you about some of the measures you and the Biden administration have taken with respect to legal avenues for migration that can dissuade individuals from embarking on dangerous and unlawful journeys across the border, and the benefits of providing migration through official ports of entry. The administration has achieved some success in decreasing the incidence of individuals crossing unlawfully between ports of entry. If you could talk briefly about what policies or actions you credit for the notable reduction in approximately 200,000 migrant arrests made outside points of entry as compared to 1 year ago.
Senator, our model is, as you reference, to build safe, lawful, and orderly pathways to cut the smuggling organizations out of the equation. They are ruthlessly exploiting the vulnerable. To build those lawful pathways that enable us to screen and vet individuals before they arrive at the border, and then to deliver consequences for those who do not avail themselves of those pathways, but indeed arrive irregularly in between our ports of entry. And quite frankly, we achieved a milestone in negotiating with Venezuela its acceptance of repatriation flights in furtherance of that consequence regime. So it's really those two parts that make a whole in the approach that we are pursuing.
And have you seen, compared to last year, more people accessing that approach?
We have, and we also have, as a process within that model, we have the CBP-1 app, which is a technological innovation that allows people to make an appointment and arrive safely at our ports of entry and allows us to screen and vet them in an orderly way as well.
Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony.
Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you both secretaries for being here today. I want to start by acknowledging the sentiments of many of my colleagues about the urgent need for border security, for policy changes, and to changes in interior enforcement. I just want to take a minute to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to start, Secretary Mayorkas, when you testified on March 29th before the Homeland Security Subcommittee regarding President's FY24 budget proposal for your department, there were 6,610 encounters at the southern border. On Monday, that number was 8,500, which is 8.5 times more than the 1,000 daily encounters that your former boss, Secretary Jay Johnson, said would constitute a crisis. I know on that day, on March 29th, you did not say that we had a crisis. My question for you is today, do you believe that we have a crisis before us?
Senator, let me make this point that is very, very important because I've been asked, would I describe it as a disaster? Would I describe it as a crisis? I do not diminish the significance and the complexity of the challenge. No, if I may.
Well, I only have 5 minutes and I only have 3 left. So is it a crisis, yes or not? I guess I'm going to move on. Secretary Becerra, do you think that we have a child care crisis, affordable child care crisis in this country?
Senator, I don't think there's any doubt that we
okay,
have
that's what I thought. Okay, so, but this is an emergency, Secretary Mayorkas. It is an emergency, though.
It is urgent that we receive the funding for our personnel and our tools to enhance the security of our border.
I think we just need to use the words it's true. It's an emergency. That's what this administration said. They put it in an emergency supplemental request, so let's treat it as such. Moving on, you did have a record year, though, in other ways. You put more people on the non-detained docket than previous 2 administrations combined in the entirety of their terms in office. This administration had near low levels of removal and detention beds filled, and this administration set another record for encounters on the southwest border, and as my colleague from New Hampshire mentioned, there was a 500% increase in the northern border in a 5-county area that impacts the area that she represents. When we talk about this, we don't need to manage the border, as it says in one of your requests here. We actually need to secure it. So in doing that, this administration has kind of had different positions, and I want to clarify it. Do you believe that a border wall is part of the answer, yes or no?
No.
No. Okay, so I have a trouble reconciling that with your the rule that you signed and issued on October 5th, where you said construction of physical barriers on the border of the United States would, in fact, prevent unlawful entries.
Senator, so if I may explain, the Congress mandated that we employ
But you didn't actually have to issue a rule. We could have done that. And one more thing, this administration and your department, the Department of Homeland Security, issued a contract for $500,000 in September of 2001 for the purchase and installation of a wall around this president's beach house. So you'll do know walls work. You do know they're part of the solution. You do know they're part of creating security. But for whatever reason, you feel like the American people are beneath that. And I think that it is incredibly frustrating. I only have a minute left, so I want to move to interior enforcement. When you're looking at the non-detained docket, I'm concerned about the growth of the number of people in the interior who are waiting years, if not decades, to have their cases heard before an immigration judge. So particularly if you look at this, the ICE officers, do we have the number of officers needed? Do they have the support that they are needed in order to manage this caseload of 6.3 million individuals and rising? So now with 40 seconds left, do you, when we have, let's see, the 1 million people that have had due process and need to be removed, do you believe that the ICE officers have what they need to be able to remove those?
Senator, as our supplemental reflects, we need more enforcement and removal operations officers. We need more support staff for them. Despite the constraint of inadequate resources, we have removed aggravated felons at a higher rate than the prior administration. We have interdicted.
I only have 17 seconds left, but you've only requested 45 more ICE officers. And the truth is, when you look at the 6,000 officers that we have and the 6.5 million people that are in the interior and the 1 million people that need to be removed, you're asking each of these agents to essentially, you've got to remove about 167 people if we were going to remove all 1 million in a year. We've got to be serious about what we're requesting. Y'all requested this 2 years ago, and either you aren't serious about it or my colleagues across the aisle didn't want to fund it, because those 45 officers that you requested did not make it into the omnibus bill. I am hopeful that we not only have the 45 that were requested, but we have much more. They have an important job to do, and we need to make sure they have the resources and the officers to do it. Thank you.
I would be pleased to speak with you, Senator, further about our supplemental request, because the data that you just cited is inaccurate, but I'll follow up with you separately.
Thank you. Senator Manchin.
Talk about it now.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank both of you for this hearing. And I think it's wonderful that we have both of you here, and I want to thank you both for your service. Most difficult subject, as you know. It's been basically a challenge for as long as I've lived, and was cognizant of the immigration problems that we have. So I'm going to put it in layman's terms. I have people asking me, they say, when we go to a football game or I go to a concert and I'm hoping I can get a ticket and get in, and they tell me, I'm sorry, all the seats are sold. So to simply put it, we seem to be filled up. Our stadium's filled up. Do you have the ability, or can you basically say, wait a minute, with all the laws and rules and regulations that we're basically working at the borders, who has this right or that right, or come in, asylum and all that, can we just not say we're filled up right now and we cannot have any more seats? Is that possible? Do you have that flexibility?
Senator, we do not have that authority under the law.
So we have to change the law to give you the authority to basically say, whether it's a pause or stop, whatever it would take, that we cannot, basically humanitarianly handle the people we're sending into the country right now. And I'm going to go into a few other things too, because West Virginians are just asking questions. We're far removed from the border. My dear friend Senator Sinema is right on the front line, so we sympathize with all of our frontline senators. But they're saying, all the people that came in illegally and everything, and they're getting all these benefits, can't they get just a work visa like you did with Venezuela at a certain time you cut it off, to make them earn and pay for their stay while they're here, pay their taxes until we're adjudicated, and see if they really have earned the right to be here or not, but at least be productive while they're here? Is that possible, or does that take a law change?
Senator, it depends how one has arrived in the United States. If, in fact, one has arrived under our lawful pathways, then one is eligible immediately for work authorization. For example, under the parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans. For example, under the CBP-1 app. If one has arrived irregularly in between the ports of entry, then one is eligible for work authorization 180 days after one has.
Why 180?
That is the statutory requirement.
So it's a statute. Then I'm just looking for things that we could change to make all of our lives better and make sure that makes some common sense. So what we're saying is that there's more of them that have come here looking to get a status that allows them to stay here or not. But I'm understanding that 80 to 90% of the people coming claiming asylum, even though we go through the process and send them somewhere, end up basically not meeting that condition of asylum. And the other thing, one other thing I'll put with it, I'm so sorry. We talk fast as we can. When we call it third party, okay, the third country processing, what they've explained to me, we're playing defense on the 1 yard line. Any way the ball crosses that goal line, that's a touchdown. Now, if we were playing defense on the 20-yard line, that means third party going into those countries, stopping that, making sure we qualify that, that would make a big difference. Does that take policy change also?
We have implemented that policy change within the constraints of a broken system. So we have set up secure mobility offices in various countries as triage centers to see whether individuals could qualify for relief in the United States. And if indeed we have made a determination that they do, then we're able to bring them safely and in an orderly way. I agree with your
And here's the
principle.
thing, the overview is this, is that, you know, everybody wants to blame whatever administration's in power, that's who we're going to blame. The bottom line is we're trying to fix things, and I know you've been getting beat up pretty good here, but the bottom line is, sir, I know you have, I got faith in you, I know you have the knowledge. We need that knowledge, and we need to help both Secretary Becerra with all his challenges too, because they go hand in hand, your two jobs. We need you to give us the direction of how we can make sure that this simple changes make a difference. People in my state are very, very red. They're very pro-Trump, okay, and I respect wherever their philosophical beliefs. I've just told them this, you're okay to have your opinion, any opinion you want. You just cannot create your own facts to support that opinion. And I want to make sure they have the facts, and I want to make sure that we have a cure. And if you'll work with us versus just condemning it, we can fix it. And that's what's happening in this country. We're putting policy and politics ahead of the people. The people are the last things in consideration with the basically deals that we're making here or the laws that we're making. 2013, as a piece of legislation that most of us were involved, that were here in 2013, was a bipartisan bill. It would have been tremendous. Because of politics in the House, the Republican, John Boehner, our friend, could not put it on the floor or didn't think he could. We don't want that to happen. So these little fixes I'm asking you about, the stadium's full. Sorry, can't come, okay? You're going to have to work if you're here until you're waiting to get adjudicated, okay? You're going to pay for yourself and pay for your taxes. You're going to be productive. We're not going to get handouts. And you're not going to be here 6 months, because I can tell you, if you're getting 6 months of handouts, you'll want another 6 months and another 6 months on top of that. That's what they're telling me. And if I can help you, sir, I am here, and I'll do whatever I can. Thank you both for your service.
Thank you. Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Chair Murray and Vice Chair Collins, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. The southwest border is in crisis. Arizona continues to bear the brunt of the federal government's failures on the border, and the situation is only getting worse. Since September 12th of this year, over 14,000 migrants have been released into small communities across Arizona. These small communities do not have the resources or transportation options to handle migrant releases. In Bisbee, a town of about 5,000 people without bus service to either Tucson or Phoenix, local leaders turned the council chambers into an emergency shelter so that migrants would no longer be dumped in a grocery store parking lot. So now is not the time for partisan rhetoric. Our system isn't working. Arizonans and migrants are suffering. Our communities are in crisis. Dangerous drugs like fentanyl are killing thousands of Americans each year. And we have to reject the partisan echo chamber and work together to make meaningful, lasting changes to solve these issues, to secure our border, keep Arizona families safe, and ensure that migrants are treated fairly and humanely. Secretary Mayorkas, in February of 2022, DHS formed the Southwest Border Coordination Center to coordinate planning, operations, engagement, and interagency support. While the SBCC didn't do nearly enough to help with resource coordination, they did relay helpful information to my office, and they answered questions in weekly meetings. But last week, my staff was informed that the SBC is standing down. These weekly meetings are ending, which is making it more difficult for my staff to get updates on the situation in Yuma and Tucson sectors. This is especially concerning given the increasing number of ongoing migrant releases in small southern Arizona communities. Will you commit to restarting these weekly meetings between CBP and my office so we can get these regular updates and ensure that our questions are answered in a timely manner?
Senator, I look forward to working with you because the Southern Border Coordinating Center was ended, but we are institutionalizing the means of communicating with local jurisdictions. We are institutionalizing further all of the mission sets that the SBCC was performing. So I will follow up with you and get back to you immediately because the communication is key with communities impacted by the influx of individuals at the border.
Okay, we'll follow up because we need a meeting every week. The current levels of migration are unprecedented and unsustainable. We've got to send a clear message to potential migrants that we will be fair and humane, but that we will secure our border and enforce our laws. Many countries are refusing to take back their nationals even after they've gotten a final removal order from the U.S. These recalcitrant countries undermine our ability to enforce our immigration laws. So what is DHS doing to get these countries to accept their nationals back? And what authorities do you need from us in Congress to more effectively compel the countries to get their citizens returned to them?
The challenge of recalcitrant jurisdictions, Senator, has been one that is decades long. I worked on it back in 2009, and quite frankly, when I was a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor in the 1990s, it was a challenge then. And we are working, not just the Department of Homeland Security alone, but working very closely with the Department of State in an all-of-administration effort to get recalcitrant jurisdictions to accept the repatriation of their nationals. In fact, we reached a milestone in that regard with respect to Venezuela, where a few weeks ago we negotiated an agreement successfully, and Venezuela agreed to take back individuals from its country who did not qualify for relief in the United States. So this is a persistent challenge and one that we are attacking persistently.
But Secretary, what do you need from Congress? What additional authority would you need from us in order to be able to return these people more rapidly?
It is really a matter of international relations, but Senator, let me pose that question to our experts and get back to you.
The Family Expedited Removal Management Program, which is called FIRM, ensures that migrant families undergo their credible fear interviews in a timely manner. We know that the stated goal is to remove families within 30 days if they don't articulate a credible fear. How many family units have been enrolled in the FIRM, and how many have been removed to their country of origin? And how many days does the process take?
I will get that data to you. I can share with you the top line that we have succeeded in removing more family members than the prior administration, and I will get that data to you.
The last few months have shown that many of our ports of entry don't have the necessary staffing or infrastructure to process the very high number of migrants that are coming in through our ports of entry while also facilitating trade and travel. What additional resources is DHS putting in place at ports of entry to ensure that trade and travel continues while migrants are being processed?
Senator, it's such an important issue that you raise and one that we have spoken about previously. Our supplemental funding request, which is so urgently needed, seeks, I think it's $240 million for 1,000 new CBP officers from the Office of Field Operations, which work our ports of entry.
And Chairwoman, I know that my time has expired. One last comment I'll make. It's obvious that DHS needs additional resources to help this process move forward. I would encourage the Department of Homeland Security and the administration to also recognize what I think is fairly obvious, which is that policy must be changed in order for us to get control of the situation on the border. The number of migrants who are crossing into just my small state alone every day is 8 to 10 times as much as it was under the Obama administration. Without policy changes, the cartels will continue to decide who enters our country through what ports and what times. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank all of our colleagues who participated today. I want to thank Secretary Becerra, Secretary Mayorkas. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here today. Senator Collins, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Thank you. First, let me thank you, Chair Murray, for convening this hearing. I want to thank our witnesses. I do feel compelled to correct what I believe is a misimpression that was created in exchanges by two of our members with Secretary Mayorkas regarding fentanyl. What we heard was that 90% of fentanyl is seized at ports of entry. What that doesn't tell you is how much fentanyl is coming in through drones that the cartels use, which Secretary Mayorkas has acknowledged previously, and coming through from gotaways. So I think it's highly misleading to say that all we've got to do to stop fentanyl is to have new technology, which I do support at our ports of entry. The second point I will quickly make is DHS cannot ignore the role that Mexico and China are playing in the fentanyl crisis. The precursors, the pill pressers, are coming from China to the Mexican cartels. So to say that this is mainly Americans that are smuggling it, that 90% comes in through ports of entry, ignores very important factors that paint a different or at least fuller picture. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a lot of work to address the child care crisis and to meet all of our pressing challenges, including the national security priorities that we talked about in this committee last week. So I want everyone to know I'm going to continue to do everything I can and working with everyone I can to make sure we meet this moment by delivering supplemental funding that speaks to all of the urgent needs before us. With that, this hearing will end. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 7 days, Wednesday, November 15th at 5 p.m. The hearing record will also remain open until then for members who wish to submit additional materials for the record. Committee stands adjourned.